All right. Welcome, everybody, to Standing for Truth. My name is Donnie Badinsky, and I'm your host for tonight's exciting program. On Standing for Truth, we uphold the truth of biblical creation. We also host some awesome guests here on the program to help us accomplish this mission. And tonight, it is a privilege to have Brian Lawyer here. Actually, Brian, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your last name right. Is that right?
Lauer.
Lauer,
Lauer.
Brian
Yep.
Lauer. So it is a privilege to have you here for a talk titled The Emperor Has No Clothes. Now, The Emperor Has No Clothes will expose the deceptions that evolutionists have used and still continue to use. They do this to prop up the faulty foundations of the Big Bang and evolution. Hopefully, enough people will stop believing these blind chance perspectives of the past so academia loses its dogmatic power over science and our dark ages will end. Now, before we get into the presentation, I want to give my guest Brian an introduction for anybody who might be unfamiliar with him. And so Brian helps people solidify their faith in the Bible by looking at science. So they are equipped to stand up to the pagan religion of our day, evolution. He has given creation and freedom talks at churches, colleges, schools, and conferences from Minnesota to Florida. Many of his talks can be seen on the Solidify Your Faith YouTube channel. And I've seen many of your presentations, Brian. They are always informative, comprehensive. I appreciate the visuals and also your use of video clips. And so I know the audience is not going to be disappointed tonight for your talk. Again, the Emperor Has No Clothes. So, Brian, I appreciate you being here, brother.
Oh, it's great to be here, and I am so excited to give this talk.
So am I. I can let the audience know, sneak preview wise, this is going to be thorough. It is going to dismantle the deception of evolution and the false pseudoscience that's going around. And so, Brian, unless there's anything you wanted to add in terms of introduction, I do have your channel and website linked in the description box for people to check out. But if there's anything you'd like to add, feel free to do so.
Yeah, I would like to add something. I would ask everybody to be skeptical, very skeptical of what I say and very skeptical of what the experts say and the evolutionists say. I'm going to show a lot of slides. That's so I don't mess up the information, and that shows you where I'm getting the information from. And so every slide hopefully has a link at the bottom, so you'll be able to double check what I'm saying so you can get all the information and get an informed decision. That's kind of a little bit about what to expect.
I love it. Yes, we want our audience to be as objective as possible and come to an informed conclusion at the end of your presentation. So, Brian, let's get right into it. Let's get right into the fun. We can get your presentation going.
All right. Oh, great. Well, thank you so much, Donnie, and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking time out of this evening to spend time here. I'll do what I can to make it worth your while. And welcome to the Emperor Who Has No Clothes. Yeah, we're going to not only look at the deceptions that the evolutionists have used and continue to use, we're going to take a look at what's wrong with science. And there's some major things wrong, and it's led to a great fiasco because we weren't allowed to question the sacred cow. And then we're going to end up with what to do. And with that, there's going to be some humor with Tim Hawkins. And so you want to stay for that. And before I begin, I think let's thank Donnie for what he does. You know, he allows this free flow of information, and it's just a great platform. So if anybody wants to type thank you to Donnie and let us know where you're watching from, I always find that interesting. And, this free flow of information is so important. If there's anything our society needs right now, it's that, because I'm just so sick of the censorship and the consensus and the browbeating and these dogmas that can't be questioned. I'm just so frustrated with that. And but my idea is let's throw all the ideas out there and let the cream rise to the top. But that's not happening in our government schools, museums, and media. All they allow is a blind chance perspective of the past. That's it. And they teach it as dogma. That's your Big Bang and evolution. And if that's all, I mean, and it'd be like thinking your
Actually,
computer.
Brian, can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
Are you ready to screen share? I feel like you might be on some slides right now, but the audience can't see them yet.
Yeah, I can show that slide to you if you want. Yeah. All right. Yeah, here we go. We'll share that one. Let's see real quickly. Present,
Yeah.
screen, share screen, entire. Okay, here
As
we
long as you're ready to screen share, I don't want to ruin the flow or anything. I wasn't sure if you knew that
Yeah, that was
the
gonna come a
screen
little
wasn't
later,
shared.
a little bit later, but if they wanna see the words, that's fine too. Let's
Oh
see,
yeah.
are we scared? Are we sharing right now?
So I see it at the bottom, Brian. What I can do is allow you to just go through with what you're saying. And then
Yeah.
when you're ready for the slides to go up, you
Yep.
just let me know and I can put them up. We
Okay.
don't have to put it up if it's just words or anything.
Yeah, it's just words right now, and basically, well, I'll let you see what I'm looking at. Can you see that? Do you see the
Yes.
screen?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, basically, yeah. Yeah, so this is what we're looking at, because and if people just, they give us this blind chance perspective of the past, and if that's all you ever see, you just memorize and conform. And that blind chance perspective, I mean, think it through. Do you think your computer got here by blind chance? That's pretty absurd, right? Well, how much more absurd is it to think that your bodies got put together here by chance? And so we want to see another perspective. And you need to see both sides if you want to think. And that's not happening in class. And so that's what I like to do. I like to give people all the information so they can come to their own informed conclusion. Let's take a look at this emperor has no clothes. That saying's been around for almost 200 years, and it means the general population is unwilling to recognize or admit the obvious shortcomings, issues, or flaws in a powerful or popular person or thing. Yeah, there's some obvious shortcomings and flaws, and they're unwilling to recognize them. It is just amazing to me. And it comes from the 1837. Hans Christian Andersen wrote it. And long story short, there was an emperor who just loved fancy clothing. And these two con men went in there and convinced him that they had the world's most beautiful clothing, but you couldn't see it if you were ignorant or stupid. And he didn't want to appear ignorant or stupid, so he played along. And so did his officials. They played along. And then pretty soon all the town played along. And he's parading through the town. And then a boy shouts out and says, "Hey, the emperor has no clothes." And then everybody realized that they had been fooled. And so that's where we're at right now. The evolutionists, the emperor has no clothes. That's what I'm saying. That evolution has no scientific evidence. Molecules to man has absolutely no observable and testable evidence, which is what science is. And so let's take a look at some of the people that show, let's take a listen to some evolutionists, shall we? This is Richard Lewontin. He's a professor of zoology and biology at Harvard. And he says evolutionists, ... have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. And I'm always curious about that ... They claim creationists that do a lot of quote mining and take things out of context. Well, what's this ... Let's get the whole thing. Evolutionists have prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. Okay, well, let's see what they're leaving out. This is what they're leaving out. Well, everything in blue is the ... Our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggle between science and the supernatural. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of the constructs, in spite of its failures to fulfill many of the extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for the unsubstantiated just so stories, because we ... have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. So this has nothing to do with science. It's a belief system. And they leave out against common sense, the patent absurdity, it's a failure, and just so stories. And the quote goes on. It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to make a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of the investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Materialism is absolute. Yeah, their God is materialism. And this has nothing to do with science. This has to do with keeping God out, rejecting God. And then it goes on to say, the eminent Kant scholar Louis Beck used to say that anyone who could believe in God could believe in anything. To appeal to an omnipotent deity is to allow that at any moment the regularities of nature may be ruptured, that miracles may happen. Well, guess what? I got a newsflash for you. Everyone believes in miracles. Yeah, I was giving a talk at St. Cloud State, and during Q&A, a student asked, well, how do you think life began? And I said, God made it. And they said, miracles, miracles. And they started to storm out of the class. Miracles, you believe in miracles. And I said, hey, everyone believes in miracles. I believe we were created by God, and you believe hydrogen and helium turn into people. Because that's what they believe. The Big Bang produced hydrogen and helium, and here we are. That's a miracle. Well, let's take a look at the miracles. And I don't care if you're, creationist, we got a miracle maker. We got no problems with this. But if you're a Big Banger or an evolutionist, these are the miracles that you believe in. Matter from nothing, that violates the first law of thermodynamics, and order from chaos violates the second law, and life from non-life violates the law of biogenesis, and immaterial ideas from matter, that's Einstein's gulf. Einstein said that's a gulf that's unbridgeable. And then consciousness from matter. And I've been watching videos for going and hearing creation stuff for over 20 years, and I've never heard anybody even try to explain how consciousness came from matter. Somebody asked Bill Nye that during the Ken Ham debate. He goes, don't know, it's a mystery. That's why we do science. And then Ken Ham says, well, Bill, there is a book that tells us how consciousness came from matter. So again, we all believe in miracles. And then we need to we need to start shouting that the emperor has no clothes. And here's a leading atheist who is shouting it from the mountaintops. This is Thomas Nagel. He wrote The Mind and Cosmos. He had a PhD from Harvard and taught at Princeton. And look at the headline. What's gotten into Thomas Nagel? Leading atheist branded a heretic for daring to question Darwinism. All he did was argue in a new book that the evolutionary view of nature is false. And now grand forces have descended upon him. That's right. He kicked the sacred cow. And look at that. They call him a heretic. He argues modern Darwinism offers a dogmatic system of thought that is intoxicating precisely because it offers the illusion of freeing us from religion. Boy, did he hit the nail on the head right there. Man, that's like 2 Peter 3. For in the last days, scoffers will come, walking after their own lusts. And I meet them at St. Cloud State. When they scoff at the Bible, it's like, hey, you guys just validated the Bible. The Bible said you'd be here. And he goes on to write, I realize that such doubts will strike many people as outrageous, but that is because almost everyone in our secular culture has been browbeaten into regarding the reductive research program about the origin of life as sacrosanct on the ground that anything else would not be science. Boy, he's just laying haymakers to these emperors, just boom, boom. Yeah, anything else would not be science. And let's define science. The scientific method is observable and testable and repeatable and falsifiable. And guess what? The Big Bang and evolution are none of that. Observation, science is observation and testing. Okay, Mr. Pinker, scientist at MIT, also called Mind and Cosmos the shoddy reasoning of a once great thinker. No, I think this guy's actually thinking. He stopped swallowing everything they were spoon feeding him, and he's starting to spit it out. And now they're just coming after him. He's kicked the sacred cow, and you can't do that. And but I think if we get enough more people, shouting this from the mountaintops, the emperor is going to lose all its power. Okay, Mind and Cosmos argues the modern scientific story of the origin of life through evolution is ripe for displacement, and it represents, it's ripe for displacement. Yeah, there's things that Dr. Carl Werner. He says, and I'm so excited to be at this part and live in this part of history because I'm seeing the Big Bang fall apart, the evolution fall apart, the origin of life theories fall apart, and plate tectonics is starting to crack, and that will fall apart too because they got the wrong perspective of the past. Okay, so it's ripe for displacement, and it represents a heroic triumph of ideological theory over common sense, which will soon be seen as laughable in a couple of generations. Well, guess what? It's laughable in this generation. And Tim Hawkins is going to, when you just laugh at it, it's an absurd theory. And I just can't wait for the comedians to get a hold of this. Okay, and then it goes on to say, if the materialist neo-Darwinian orthodoxy contradicts common sense, then it is a mark against orthodoxy, the orthodoxy, not the common sense. When a chain of reasoning leads us to deny the obvious, we should double check the chain of reasoning before we give up on the obvious. And it is obvious a building had a builder. It is obvious a painting had a painter. And it's just as obvious a creation had a creator. Because if you don't agree with that, you have to live in a constant state of hypocrisy. Yeah, Mount Everest, that couldn't have got there by natural processes and blind chance. That's incredibly designed. People put that there. But yet we're supposed to believe that George Washington himself got here by blind chance, natural processes. Yeah, that's absurdity to the nth degree. And he goes on to say, for a long time, I have found the materialistic account of how we and our fellow organisms came to exist hard to believe. Yeah, I find it hard to believe too. And this is a leading atheist and just body blow on this evolution theory. And he writes, it's prima facie highly implausible that life as we know it is the result of a sequence of physical accidents together with the mechanism of natural selection. Yeah, and then he says, materialism is, as Nagel suggests, self-evidently absurd. Man, he's just pounding on it. Yeah, I agree 100% with all of these. And Mind and Cosmos can be read as an extended paraphrase of Orwell's famous insult. One has to belong to the intelligentsia to believe things like that. No ordinary man could be such a fool. That's right. They are fools. Even the Bible says the fool has said in his heart there is no God. And when you reject God, you are a fool. When you believe all these things, and even the atheists call him a fool. But Orwell, let's make 1984 fiction again, shall we? Enough of this surveillance and mind control. And the thing that pops out at me for 1984 was the part where it said that those who control the past control the future, and those who control the present control the past. So think about this. The evolutionists are controlling the past by getting rid of God. So now if there's no God, what's the ultimate authority? It's the government. So in the future, the government can make us jump through whatever hoop they want us to jump through for some invisible enemy, the climate or a virus or whatever. And then those who control the present control the past. That's why people are getting censored. They're losing their jobs, they're losing their websites, they're losing their megaphone because they're messing with the past, the perspective of the past. That's got a blind chance perspective, and it's just an absurd perspective from my perspective. Okay, the positive mission Nagel undertakes in Mind and Cosmos is to outline cautiously a possible third way between theism and materialism, given that the first is unacceptable. They will not allow a divine foot in the door. They've already admitted that. It's unacceptable, emotionally, if not intellectually. And the second is untenable. Materialism doesn't work. We looked at all those miracles. And then he goes on to say, fortunately, materialism is never translated into life as it is lived. As colleagues and friends and husbands and mothers, wives and fathers, sons and daughters, materialists never put their money where their mouth is. Well, that's not true. On occasion, they do, and it's not pretty. Nobody thinks of his daughter as molecules in motion. A materialist who lived his life according to his professed convictions, understanding himself to have no moral agency at all, seeing his friends and enemies and families as genetically determined robots, wouldn't just be a materialist, he'd be a psychopath. Yeah, and he would be a psychopath, and this guy lived it out. This is Jeffrey Dahmer. He killed people and he ate people, and this is what he said. If a person doesn't think there's a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway. I always believed the theory of evolution is true, that we all just came from the slime. When we died, that was it. There's nothing. So beliefs have consequences. And Jerry Bergman wrote a book that said evolution is the doorway to atheism. Yeah, and if you have no God, this is what could happen. And if there's no God, what's wrong with that? And I have conversations at St. Cloud State for hours sometimes talking about, with no God, how do you determine right and wrong? But that's another talk for another time. And here's another quote from Henry Lipson, head of the physics department at the University of Manchester. In fact, evolution became, in a sense, a scientific religion. Yeah, they called Thomas Nagel, they called him a heretic, right? A scientific religion. That's right. Now, the religion in the Old Testament is the Big Bang. The New Testament is the geologic column. Okay, and they've got their high priest to make sure that religion gets passed on to the next generation. Okay, so it's in a sense a scientific religion. Almost all scientists have accepted it, and many are prepared to bend their observations to fit in with it. So let's do a little survey here. Type yes or no in the chat or the comments. Okay, do you believe that scientists would bend their observations to make it fit with evolution? Yes or no? You think scientists would do that, or scientists are just beyond reproach? They would never bend the observations. And if you want to keep an eye on that, Donnie, you can let us know at the end who the winner is. Are we skeptical or are we naive? Okay, so let's take a look, listen to, this is Helmut Wilkie. He gave this talk at the Twin Cities Creation Science Association, and this is the highlight of the talk. It's titled "A Flood, an Ice Age, and Climate Change." And listen to what he has to say.
Falsify your data. If you do not believe that there's anything wrong.
Can you hear that?
It's coming in, Brian. It's coming in. Okay. It could possibly be a little louder, but let me try on my end.
Okay. Let's try it again.
But if you falsify your data,
yes, that sounds good.
If you do not believe that there's anything wrong with bearing false witness to your colleagues in the scientific community, because you'll get more funding, we have a problem, and this is getting worse. I know people doing this in the field of genetics. Get more funding. They publish the data about some of their research, but it's not true, and it doesn't help science.
Yeah, and he goes on, and we're gonna hear another clip like this at the end by Dr. Jerry Bergman. Yeah, they are fudging the data to get money, and he also said that even the climate change data was fudged. And he points to the Cornwall Alliance, and if anybody's interested in that, that's on the TCCSA YouTube channel, and that's Helmut Wilkie. And it's about 57 minutes into that talk, if you just want to hear what he talks about fudge data. And that's, again, that's a flood, an ice age, and climate change. And that's going to be on the TCCSA YouTube channel. Okay, but now let's take a look at the most famous fossil of all, Lucy. Okay, one of the tactics for evolutionists is to just blatantly, I don't want to say it, but they give false information, shall we? Okay, it says Lucy, this is a 10th grade textbook. It said Lucy had a remarkably complete skeleton. This college textbook says it's a nearly complete skeleton for Lucy. And this high school one says it's almost complete. So in the chat, what would an almost complete skeleton be? Or nearly complete? Or remarkably complete? Just go, what do you think? Put that in the chat. We got 200 some bones. Would almost complete be like 180? 190 maybe? Remarkably complete? Nearly complete? Well, this is what they got, maybe 40 bones. Yeah, it's most of the bones are gone. They're not there. I don't know how they get remarkably complete or almost complete out of that, but that's the story they tell. And look at the hands and the feet. There's nothing there, but they put human hands, human feet, and whites in the eyes in the exhibit. They're doing everything they can to bend their observation to make Lucy, this chimp, into a human. Okay, and this is Lucy's chimp. This is Lucy's. These are pictures of hips. Okay, the left one is a chimp hip. The right one is a human hip. Okay, and what's in the middle? Lucy. Does that look more like the left or the right? Go ahead, chat away. Yeah, it looks like it looks like a chimp hip for sure. And I was at the kiosk at St. Cloud State, and the anthropology department was beside me. And I said, "Did you know they cut Lucy's hip to turn it from a chimp hip to a human hip?" And she said, "No, they didn't." I said, "Yeah, they did." And she said, "No, they didn't." I said, "It's on my computer. Do you want to look at it?" And she said, "No." She didn't want to get her mind blown by that. She's pretty happy letting the emperor, should say, that have the beautiful clothes, but she didn't want to be confused by the facts, I guess. But this is, you can see this is their video. It's In Search of Human Origins with Don Johansson, and you're going to be able to see this. Okay, hopefully you'll be able to hear.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bones seem to flare out like a chimp's. But all was not lost. Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
Yeah, well, I hope so. If you cut it apart and put it back together the way you want it to look, it better look like that. But did you notice they lied about how many, or they basically they gave false information about how many bones they had. And are they bending their observation? They're even doing more than that. They're cutting it apart and they're putting it back together. And so and then this is the Litohle footprint, so that they found 1,000 miles away from where they found Lucy. And Dr. Johansen wrote that the only hominid present in the Litohle deposit was the Lucy type. That was what he wrote. So Lucy must have made those footprints, but that was false because Mary Leakey discovered a human skull before that. And when Dr. Carl Werner was taking pictures of the fossils there, he almost fell out of the chair when they brought out a human one. Well, if they had human skulls back then, and then a human made those footprints, not Lucy. But Dr. Johansen, he had the opportunity to correct his misstatements in the 1997 Nova television documentary about Lucy and in his 2002 interview with the author, but he did not. This is the second example of Dr. Johansen seemingly and knowingly providing false information when communicating with the public about his 8-man Lucy. So evolutionists, they seem to have a pattern of saying false information to prop up evolution. If evolution was true, they won't have to say false information. How about Piltdown Man? You know, that was found in 1912 and it was in the textbooks for 40 years. And then nobody could get their hands on it until the 1950s. And when they finally got a hold of it, they found out it was a human skull paired with an orangutan's teeth and jaw. Yeah. And then how long did it take for that to get out of the textbooks? You know, and again, so it's blatant fraud to prop up a theory because you can't use truth to prop up that failed theory. And this is from the Natural History Museum. It says, Piltdown Man, the greatest hoax in the history of science? ? Well, that's debatable. There's a whole lot more coming at you. Which one's going to give you the greatest? Yeah, it's neck and neck with some of them. And a lot of the information that you're going to be seeing is from thegrandexperiment.com. This is Dr. Carl Werner. He spent 27 years of his life going around the world photographing fossils and interviewing scientists. And he came out with 3 volumes last March. And he claims to have 150 cases of fraud in human evolution. 150 cases, and he doesn't use fraud lightly, as we'll see as with Nebraska Man. And then he put out 6 videos also. It's just incredible. And he's going to be speaking later on this month on a Zoom call. I'll let you know about that in the end. But Nebraska Man, they found a tooth. Now let's set the stage for this. I didn't realize this until I read Dr. Carl Werner's book. What's the backdrop for this Nebraska Man? You know, William Jennings Bryan, he called out the evolutionists. He's saying, hey, where's your evidence for evolution? And then Henry Fairfield Osborne had to step up to the plate. And this is a debate in the New York Times, you know, so everybody in the world's watching it. And so they needed some evidence. And then lo and behold, here comes this tooth that they say was 8-man. So that's the backdrop to what's happening in 1925. Okay, the evidence for Nebraska Man was used by evolutionists in the famous Scopes evolution trial in 1925. And William Jennings Bryan was confronted with a battery of great scientific experts who stunned him with the facts of Nebraska Man. And the experts scoffed and made a mockery of him. After all, who was he to question the world's greatest scientific authorities? Well, I'm saying everybody should question the scientific authorities, even if they're the greatest ones, because you're going to see that they made a lot of mistakes and they've lost a lot of credibility because they haven't been accurate and even truthful at times. And so the authorities who ridiculed Mr. Bryan for his supposed ignorance created an entire race of humanity out of the tooth of a pig. What an embarrassment to the scientific community. They lost a lot of credibility in that. I don't think they've gotten it back. Okay, but this is what they found from one tooth. You got to be pretty good to know what, from one tooth, what the person looks like and what his wife looks like and what his teeth looks like. And this is a picture, this is a PDF of his book, from his book. It's just so well done. And it's actually an image from the Illustrated London News back then. Okay, and so here's what's going on here. In 1922, when that debate in the New York Times is going on, hey, we found this, here's a tooth, an 8-man tooth. And then 1925, they have the Scopes monkey trial, where that was used as evidence for 8-man and to discredit creation. And then 1927, they came out and said, oh, no, our mistake, it was a wild pig. And Dr. Werner, he says, that's not fraud. That's a mistake. I would say that's incompetence, but he says that's a mistake. What is fraud, however, is when they knowingly lied about when the tooth was found. They said they found it last year when it was actually found 5 years before that. Because if they would have said, yeah, we found it 6 years ago, it's like, well, why didn't you say something? And then also, they did not show the pig jaw that was found at the scene, and they found that like 8 years before that. They found it, and there was an article, they wrote a paper on it saying, be careful, these teeth look like human teeth. But they withheld that from the public. So that's two cases of fraud on one exhibit. And so what happened to Henry Fairfield Osborne? Did he get laughed out of? Did he resign in embarrassment? Did they laugh him out of his museum? No. He was elected president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the highest honor that U.S. and Canadian scientists can give a colleague, and appeared on the cover of Time magazine. It's like, what? You put somebody like this on Time magazine after that big a blunder? You thought that a pig tooth was an ape man? And I thought maybe they put him on the cover before they realized that it was a pig tooth. But no, they figured it out in 1927. I checked it out. They put him on the cover in 1928. So are people getting rewarded for these incredible blunders that prop up evolution? Are they getting rewarded for that? Yeah, they are. The next in line is Dr. Raymond Dart from South Africa. He found this skull and he said it was ape man skull. And his colleagues said, no, that's a chimpanzee skull. And they rebuked him. So was he embarrassed? No, he got promoted. Dart was promoted after being rebuked by his colleagues. They appointed him the dean of the Faculty of Medicine because the university liked the attention they were getting. Well, I think there was some evolutionists that maybe like that the creation is getting, they want to promote creation. So they want more people standing up and saying stuff, even if it's not true. And so this is one of his colleagues. I can remember one of the last things that Dart said to me before he died was, he said, Brain, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Think about that. Who cares about the truth? We're telling a story here, a good story. That's evolution. Yeah, so don't let the truth get in the way of that. So then Dart moves on and he's replaced by Philip Tobias. And does he have a little more integrity? Well, you decide. Listen to Dr. Ron Clark.
Philip Tobias summoned me to his office and he said, I want you to make a new reconstruction of STW53. And I said, oh, why? And he said, well, I'm not the brain size, it's too small. And I said, but that's the way it is. It can't be made any bigger. The anatomy shows that was the size of the brain case. He wanted it to be a Homo habilis. In fact, he kept publishing this as a Homo habilis. He then asked a research fellow that he just appointed there, Darren Kernow, he asked him to make a new reconstruction. And what Kernow did was he separated out this near contact here. He separated it out by 8 millimeters and made this wider. He flexed the parietal occipital contact here. He flexed it upward to make it bigger. He took apart other pieces as well and expanded it. And he moved this frontal bone forward to make it very elongated. And it's totally false because there was no justification for what they did. It was simply Philip Tobias's ambition to make this into a Homo habilis.
Yeah, and why would he want to do that? Well, that's your gravy train. You find ape-man bones, everybody wants to hear about it. And so, yeah, these are the bones that he's talking about. The one on the left is what Clark put together, and the one on the right, they needed it to be bigger, a Homo habilis. They needed to have a bigger brain skull, and he says there is no justification for that at all. So, yeah, they're bending their observation. Again, this seems to be the pattern. They're bending their observations to make evolution believable because evolution doesn't have any real evidence to make it believable. And if you only get one, this is the cliff notes of the whole book series right here. Just understand these 2 paragraphs. Okay, now look on the left page there. You got 5 different ape men, and one of them's Nebraska man, right? In the bottom right there, or in the middle right. And listen to what he says. Okay, spoiler alert, it may come somewhat of a surprise to learn that all 5 ape men seen on the previous page were created using ordinary non-primate mammal bones. Okay, so there's no human bones and there's no ape bones, all right? And yet they're making ape men. So what do they make these out of? Well, 40 professional scientists promoted these ape men, which were made using dolphin, cat, dog, hippo, pig, horse, donkey, raccoon, and bovid family bones. They can make an ape man out of anything the way it sounds. Okay, these scientists held 43 university professorships. So these are the experts in the field. They chaired, 15 university science departments, founded 14 natural history museums, directed 13 natural history museums, and authored more than 4,500 science journal articles and 128 books on the topic of evolution. So these are the experts, and they couldn't tell dolphin bones from people bones. And they also misinterpreted 16,000 ordinary rocks as ape men stone tools. Yeah, these are the experts. And I think they've lost a lot of credibility. If you go through Dr. Carl Werner's books and watch his videos, they have no credibility after that. Okay, and then it moves on. This is Orsi, ape man. They found it in Spain, and it was a big boom to the community. And it was a big boom. It got written. It was so exciting that it got written about in 300 articles plus radio and TV coverage the first year. And this is 1983. This isn't way back then. Well, maybe it is way back then for you, and I was alive then, and this is just hit the press like crazy. Everybody knows about this Orsi ape man. But then they cleaned up the skull a little bit and they found these ridges on it, which means it was a donkey. So it's a donkey that they're making all this fuss about. And there was some scientists that said, you gotta tell the people the truth here. This is a donkey skull. It's not a human skull. But there are some reasons why they wouldn't want to do this. This is 1984. First of all, there's 500 guests were coming to Orsi to attend an international science conference. That'd be pretty embarrassing if you said, hey, this isn't a man, it's a donkey. And then Dr. Gilbert had been promoted because of the notoriety, and they were calling Orsi the Mecca of paleontology, and they thought it was a world-class research center. And also the budget quadrupled, and the people working on it were famous, and Dr. Gilbert was going to get royalties to write a book about the ape man. Man, this is his meal ticket. He doesn't want it to be a donkey, but somebody exposed it as a donkey. And the newspapers reported the embarrassing error. Headlines such as, ass is taken for a man. Scientists make an ass of an old skull. And the international conference was quickly and quietly canceled. A press conference to announce the mistake was never held. So was he embarrassed and shamed? Did he go quietly? No. This is his meal ticket. Dr. Jose Gilbert also sought and obtained endorsements from his Orsi ape man from prominent evolutionists, such as none other than Philip Tobias, the guy who made his skull bigger to make it from a chimp to a human. So what's going on here? Is this maybe a good old boys club? They all say yours is an ape man if you say mine is an ape man. And so now that Orsi man is showing up from 1989 to 2016. It's showing up in National Geographic and Nature, and it's still being called an ape man, the Orsi ape man. All these publications. It's an embarrassment to science, but it's still in the museum. It's still currently housed in its own museum. And this curator said, a former one said, most people don't believe that it's a human, especially the paleontologist. Yeah, the paleontologist might know. But if you don't know anything about it and you walk into a museum, you just believe it, right? Well, not anymore. Not anymore. If they're going to promote a donkey as a human. But is that an isolated case? No, it's not. They did the same thing with the Rhodocetus. It's on the lineage between a land animal and the whale. Rhodocetus, this is a 10th grade textbook, and this is another 10th grade textbook. They're showing Rhodocetus, and it shows up in a museum at the University of Michigan, and it's interesting because the person who found it is working there. And listen to this shocking interview.
When this video series was being filmed on location at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, the executive producer noticed a discrepancy between museum drawings of Rhodocetus and the fossils. The reconstruction of Rhodocetus had a whale fluke, but there were no fossils of the tail to confirm this. Dr. Phil Gingrich, the scientist responsible for the discovery and reconstruction of Rhodocetus, was questioned how he knew there was a whale fluke on Rhodocetus, since that part of the fossil was missing.
What was the reasoning that the scientists think there was a fluke on Rhodocedus based on the other pieces of anatomy?
Well, I told you we don't have the tail in Rhodocedus. So we don't know for sure whether it had a ball vertebra indicating a fluke or not. So I speculated it might have had a fluke.
Scientist Gingrich also acknowledged that the flippers were drawn on the diagram without these fossils. Now, he does not believe this animal had flippers. Again, his answer was surprising, since the museum diagrams had flippers on Rhodocedus.
Now, since then, we found the forelimbs, the hands, and the front arm, the arms, in other words, of Rhodocedus. And we understand that it doesn't have the kind of arms that can be spread out like flippers are on a whale. And if you don't have flippers, I don't think you can have a fluke tail and really powered swimming. And so I now doubt that Rhodocedus would have had a fluke tail.
Many experts consider whales to be the best fossil evidence for evolution, but are unaware of these discrepancies. Opponents of evolution contend that whale evolution is nothing more than hopeful supposition. If museum diagrams are redrawn and corrected for various discrepancies, opponents argue that whale evolution is non-existent.
Yeah, it's non-existent. And so the discoverer of this Rhodocedus in his own museum, they had a fluke tail, and he said it didn't have a fluke tail. And it was in the textbooks years after this interview. So it takes a long time to get out. But to their credit, in 2024, I did not see that in that textbook. So it finally got out. But what else is it? What's in the museum right now that is going to be pulled out later? And so now this one's Haeckel's drawings. I couldn't believe this when I saw that. It's like, are you kidding me? You know, this is those images on the left. Those are embryos. They look real similar to Haeckel's drawings. And it basically says on the right there, you know, you got the bird, the bunny, and the person. You say, look at them. They look the same as their embryos, and they just go differently. But now look at these images and compare them to Haeckel's false images. You know, the chicken, the rabbit, the bunny, and even the salamander, the turtle, the fish, they all look the same. And he's saying, you know, and the backdrop for this is, let's see, in 1859, Darwin's book comes out, and Haeckel loves the book, loves the theory, and he thought if only there was some evidence. There wasn't any evidence. So 10 years later, he makes some evidence. He makes these and he says, look at this. We're all going through our evolutionary stages in our embryo phase. You know, he called it ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. And nobody had microscopes to check his work, and they were frauds. This is what they actually look like. They don't look anything like each other. They don't look anything like his drawings. So it was a fake. It was a fraud. And so is he bending his observations? Absolutely. That seems to be the pattern. They bend their observations. And this is from 2015, how fudged embryo illustrations led to drawn out lies. It's embarrassing, but true. Some of the most influential drawings in the history of biology are wrong, exaggerated to fit a thesis. Well, that's just another way of bending their observations, right? Yeah, they're wrong. And then it says, and this is in 1997, embryonic fraud lives on, New Scientist, still appear, the setup 19th century. Think about that. We're in the 21st century now, okay? So in the 19th century, over 100 years ago, the drawings still appear in reference books, such a set of 19th century drawings that still appear in the reference books, such as Gray's Anatomy. Okay, and it says that although Haeckel confessed to drawing from the memory and was convicted of fraud at the University of Vienna, the drawings persist. That's the real mystery. Yeah, why are these fraudulent images still in 2024 textbooks? Because I was showing, I had a booth at the fair talking to people about this, and somebody said, well, they should update the textbooks. It's like, you think? 100 some years, that should be enough time. But, you know, these are 2024 textbooks. They can't get much more modern than that. Okay, but let's let Eugenie Scott explain why those drawings are still in textbooks. And this interview is, you know, at least 2007. It might have even been before that. But she's the director of the National Center for Science Education. Listen to why she thinks these embryos are still in the books. Whoops. Wait a minute.
10 or 15 years.
Let's try that again.
And actually, it's been known for 10 or 15 years that Haeckel's embryos are not to be relied upon. The reason why the diagrams are reproduced is because they're easily available. There's no copyright on them. It's an easy way to illustrate a point.
Well, what's your point, Eugenie? Yeah, apparently the point is false because you're using false information to illustrate that point. You know, I think we should just teach the kids accurate information. And I pointed this out along with many other, there's probably 6 things that I pointed out to the curriculum director in my school district. And the curriculum director got back to me and said that basically we're just teaching the state standards. And so I asked her, well, what standard says we're only 1.6% different from chimpanzees? Because this is a video that they showed. I got access to their online textbooks and I went through it and I got to see the videos. And I said, only, you know, what state standard says that? Because that's not true. Even according to secular publications like PubMed, you know, this is part of the NIH. It says that it's divergence between samples of chimpanzee and human DNA sequence is 5%, not 1.6. And keep in mind, every tenth of a percent is 3 million base pairs. So the difference between 1.6% and 5% is over 100 million base pairs. And that's a lot. They can't get all those mutations in that limited amount of time that they say apes turned into humans. And then they go on to say the conclusion is that the old, you know, what they saw before, was that we share 98.5% of our DNA sequence with chimpanzees is probably an error. Yeah, probably an error. For this sample, a better estimate would be about 95%. So again, 100 million base pairs. And then Nature, journal Nature, this is in 2010. The other one was, I think, in 2002. So 20 years ago, they knew that 1.6% was wrong. 20 years ago. And then in 2010, it says fecal Y chromosome. It says the common chimp and human Y chromosomes are horrendously different from each other. Well, horrendously different sounds like a whole lot more than 1.6%. And you go into Answers Research Journal in 2013, Jeffrey Tompkins, he got his PhD in genetics from Clemson. He tells you what horrendously different is. He says only 69% of the chimpanzee X chromosome was similar to human, and only 43% of the Y chromosome. So yeah, so what it's 57% different. That's horrendously different. And so I asked, I asked the curriculum director, I asked her, what state standard says we're 1.6% different from chimpanzees? And she did not respond to me, but the superintendent did. And she said, we are in the process of reviewing your concern and our response with the publisher so they can fix the textbook. No, with their district's law firm. They contacted a law firm instead of contacting the publisher and let them know, hey, you got some questionable information in your textbooks. I thought, contact them. And instead, and they could do that for free. And I don't think that law firm did that work for nothing. Okay. So I went to the school board and I asked the school board members, would you please contact the publishers and let them know they got false information in the textbook so that it can get taken out before the school year begins? And I didn't know if they talked about it or not, because you only get 3 minutes at the beginning. But it's a lot easier getting a microphone at a school board meeting than it is at St. Cloud State. Trust me on that one. But so I emailed all the board members. It's like, was this discussed? What happened? And one of them got back to me and said that the superintendent let us know that I'd been working on it with had been working on it with the curriculum director. And I said, and I thought, think that through. If that was accurate, I wouldn't have had to go to the school board meeting now, would have I? So I went back to the school board meeting and I pointed out that if we're knowingly allowing false information to be taught to the kids, that's lying to kids. And that attitude should not be tolerated. If there's anybody like that, and I believed it. Maybe I was naive, maybe I don't know what, but I did. I thought we wanted accurate textbooks. And I thought everybody would want accurate textbooks. And so I said, if there's anybody who doesn't want accurate textbooks, that person should be reprimanded or voted out at the next election. And then the very next day, I got an email from the superintendent that said, the concern you brought forward is now considered resolved. It's like, what? You didn't do anything? You leave them in there and you think that's resolved? So I went back to the school board meeting. Yeah, they considered it resolved. And so I went back to a school board meeting again. And again, I've been there 6 times. And I don't know how they sleep at night. I really don't. And the guy who, my friend, he records me. You can see these on my YouTube channel, check it out. And he says, they're never going to believe you. And it's like, I'm not, at this point, I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for people who can watch this. I hope this happens at every school board meeting, and also it forced them to lay down their cards. Apparently they don't care that there's false information in the textbooks. So if there's somebody who wants that school board seat in the election, he could have a real strong campaign saying, I want the kids to have accurate information in the textbooks. The person on that school board, he doesn't. They've done nothing about trying to correct the textbooks. Nothing. They just kicked it to the curb. And plus, if you want to be it's even easier at our school district because our test scores are far below state average, far below. Only 1 in 4 students can do math or science at the state standard, and only 1 in 3 can read at that level. And yet we have the superintendent of the year last year when we had declining test scores. So that tells me that the Department of at least the Minnesota Department of Education, it has nothing to do with education. How could you give a superintendent with failing scores the superintendent of the year? Apparently, education isn't part of the problem, part of the solution or equation, apparently. But anyhow, this is something else that I told them. I showed them in the textbooks. I showed them. I emailed all the school board members. If you trace the history of water back billions of years, it is likely that water provided the liquid environment for life to begin. I was talking to a science instructor at a college one time, and he said that he always has his students have a journal with fuzzy words in it, like might have, could have, probably, scientists think, where it's not really science, but they want you to think a certain way. So billions of years, that's not observable or testable. That's fuzzy words. And likely, that's not science. And so then the students, they'll realize when they're being taught science, which is observation and testing, and then when they're being taught belief systems about the past. And that's important, because there's fiction in the science books. And this is a college textbook where it says it rained on the rock for millions of years. And somehow, despite this harsh environment, living organisms appeared. That's not science. That's a belief system, a blind chance belief system of the past. And I believe that's absurd. And this is a chemical. I mean, this is brand new. This is this is a video in their 2024 textbooks. It talked about degrees of freedom in water where the chemicals can come together and they have degrees of freedom. And it says the chemicals, the raw ingredients that make up life, were constantly sloshing around, bumping into each other and combining into new chemistry. Over millions of years, that process can lead to living organisms. No, it can't. It can't. It cannot lead. It's not going to start in water. It can't start in water. And it's not me saying that. It's Jonathan Sarfati. This is a 1-minute clip. I played it at the school board meeting. And I said, hey, there's a PhD chemist who says what you're teaching in the textbook is wrong. There's no way water can make the molecules for life because water breaks it apart. And I said, he's got a PhD. What degree does our curriculum director have? What degree does our science lead director have? If they don't have PhDs in chemistry, they should listen to this and take notes and warn the science teachers. But let's just listen to Dr. Sarfati.
We're taught that chemical evolution started in the oceans, but you say that's the last place you'd expect to look. Why?
Well, okay, to build up a big molecule called a polymer from many little molecules called monomers, for instance, proteins from amino acids and DNA or RNA from the nucleotide building blocks, every step of the way, every combination spits out a water molecule. They call that condensation. But if you already have water molecules dissolving these things, then the water would come back and actually break that bond apart. It's called hydrolysis. So if you try to do this in water, it's the hydrolysis, the breaking apart that would happen and not the forming. In fact, chemists who want to make proteins or DNA or RNA, they exclude water as much as they can. They even have water absorbing chemicals to draw out the water. So a primordial ocean is the last place I'd expect to find these polymers forming.
Yeah, and I played that and I asked the school board, can you justify what you're teaching the kids? Because it's clearly wrong. And they never emailed me back. And so then I went back again. I said, is there anybody in the whole school district that can justify this false information? And they just don't respond. And that's what happened with the emperor. Even when everybody knew he didn't have any clothes on, he just kept proudly walking down the street. That's what's happening with the evolutionists. They just keep proudly walking down the street, even though their theory's falling apart. And it's just going to be an embarrassment to them. So we just need more people like Jonathan Sarfati saying, hey, the emperor has no clothes. And I got about 60 of these 1-minute clips on a flash drive, and I go over to St. Cloud State and I play them on my Bluetooth speaker as people are walking by. And I was doing that, and one guy, he biked by and he said, get mental health, get mental help. And I said, people who think they're mutated animals that came from pond scum, that came from exploding stars, that came from nowhere, they're the ones who need mental help, But yeah, it's interesting there. But anyhow, yeah, there's some great resources out there, a lot of resources. We just have to get them into the general population so they stop believing these so-called experts. And then even NASA admits that water is a problem for the origin of life. You can hear this on rsr.org/NASA-water. Bob Enyart got one of his questions asked at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, which was a big thing going on in Germany. I don't know how he did it, but he did, and listen to this question. Let's see here.
This is for Dr. Wojtek, for Mary. It is from Bob, an independent science reporter. And the question is, rather than an asset, isn't water the enemy of prebiotic molecules? It's the universal solvent. And outside of a living organism, water dissolves life's building blocks like amino acids, sugars like RNA and DNA, various kinds of carbohydrates and other polymers. Shouldn't this chemical challenge be more openly acknowledged in astrobiology? I guess this assumes it's not acknowledged, but what do you say?
I think it's acknowledged.
Well, it's not acknowledged in our high school textbooks. It's not acknowledged there. And then she dodged the question. But to the moderator's credit, he brought her back on task. And listen to what he is.
I think the question is, it posits that water is a challenge for prebiotic evolution, that because it attacks the various molecules involved.
So in some of the prebiotic things, this is something that people think about. Hydration and dehydration reactions are really important in prebiotic chemistry. And so postulating that life could evolve when there is no opportunity for an environmental separation to allow dehydration reactions actually is a problem, and people do address that.
So it is a problem, and people do address that. That's what she said. So it is a problem, but that problem is not being addressed in our high school textbooks, not at all. And they have no idea how life started in any material, because there's a $10 million offer to replicate cellular evolution. Go into evo2.org, evo2.org. And if you want the $10 million, all you have to do is solve the largest mystery in history, how genetic code inside cells got there, and how cells intentionally self-organize, communicate, and then purposely adapt. Yeah, have at it. There is more evidence now against evolution than ever, because when Darwin came up with this theory, he said, we don't know how life began because we don't know enough. And now we know enough, and we really don't know how life began. The goalposts just keep getting farther and farther away, because he thought the living cell was just like a ping pong ball, just a blob of jello, and he was wrong. There's predictions of the big bangers and blind chancers. They're always wrong, or mainly almost always wrong. A blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while, but the vast majority of them are wrong. Okay, and here's this new Scientific American in 2011. Psst, don't tell the creationists, but scientists don't have a clue how life began. They're doing our job for us. Yeah, the emperor has no clothes. They don't have a clue. And it says DNA can make neither proteins nor copies of itself without the help of catalytic proteins called enzymes. This fact turned the origin of life into a classic chicken or egg puzzle. Which came first, proteins or DNA? And then it goes on to say that there's the RNA world hypothesis remains problematic. RNA and its components are difficult to synthesize under the best of circumstances in a laboratory, let alone under plausible prebiotic conditions. And then also dissatisfied with conventional theories of life's beginning, Crick, that's the co-discoverer of Francis Crick, he's the co-discoverer of DNA. He conjectured that aliens came to Earth in a spaceship and planted the seeds of life here, because he saw how complex the DNA was. And there's no way that's coming together by chance. So did he believe in a creator? No, he believed in aliens. Far away, long time ago. Yeah, it's actually Richard Dawkins is going along with this. If you've seen Expelled, that's what he's going along with. And then this one, Evolution Hopes You Don't Know Chemistry, The Problem with Chirality by Charles McCombs, PhD. He's just brilliant. He's got a bunch of patents. But he goes on to say that how a random chance natural process can create proteins with thousands of L molecules, left-handed molecules, and then also create DNA with billions of R molecules. And he says the reality of chirality, that's the left-handed and the right-handed part of proteins. And when you're alive, it's 100% left-handed. And then when you die, it goes back eventually to a 50-50 mix. There's something going on here. I heard somebody say? Death is when chemistry's victory over biology. Somehow biology keeps the chemistry from doing what it wants to do. And it wants to make it a 50-50 mix, but biology keeps it 100% left-handed. Okay, so the reality of chirality, more than any other evidence, did more to convince me of the reality of an all-powerful creator. And when we show them that the laws of natural science cannot explain the existence of chirality, evolutionists say the process happened a long time ago in some unknown method that they cannot explain. Now who's relying on a supernatural explanation? Yeah, miracles. And it says, evolution can give you a theory that might on the surface seem plausible, but when true science gets involved and scientists start asking questions, the problems and false logic of the theory become apparent. This is why evolution just hopes you don't know chemistry. And this is the evolution of the eye. This is in our science textbooks. This is a video that they show. It says these are false statements right here. In 2024, these are false statements. They're either outdated or ignorant or bold-faced lies, one of the two. I'm not sure what their motive is, but they're wrong. It says scientists haven't been able to come up with a working hypothesis as to why our retinas are set up backwards. There aren't any scientifically proven positives. Well, this is in 2015. This is what the Smithsonian said. Here's why your eyes seem to be wired backward. Light has to pass through nerve cells to get to the rods and cones, but that order is no mistake. The glial cells did indeed create columns of concentrated light. And also Medical Express goes into more detail. They say the glial cells can guide light just like fiber optic cables. And the light was not scattered evenly, but concentrated in a few spots. So this optimization is such that color vision during the day is enhanced, while the nighttime vision suffers very little. So there is a purpose. There is a reason. There are reasons why it's that way. But our kids are being taught something totally false. Totally false. And I pointed it out to the curriculum director. I pointed it out to the school board, and they've done nothing about it, as far as I know. And this is an evolutionary tree that they have available for the teachers to use. And notice here that the humans, they broke off of something that became starfish, that broke off of something that became insects, that broke off of something that became mushrooms, that broke off of something that became bacteria. So let's do a poll here. And type yes if you think humans came from bacteria. And if you think we have a common ancestor with bananas, type yes, okay? And if you think no, type no. And Donnie, if you want to keep a track on that, which one wins. And keep in mind, all those lines are false. All the dots are science, but all the lines are imagination. There is no evidence for any of that. And don't take my word for it. Take Stephen Jay Gould's. He was an evolutionary biologist at Harvard. He's the one who came up with punctuated equilibrium because there wasn't evidence for the gradual evolution. And he says the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as a trade secret of paleontology. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks, like I just showed you, have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. That's what I said. The round circles, that's where the data is. All the lines are false. He says the rest is inference, however reasonable, not the evidence of fossils. And let's talk about fossils. For a rock fossil to form, the body of the dead animal must undergo fast, complete burial, slowing the decay process. And we can do an experiment right now. Deer are getting hit on the roads all the time here in Minnesota. Are our ditches filling up with deer fossils? No. They're getting scavenged. They're decomposing. No, the only way it turns into a fossil if there's a fast, complete burial. They have to be buried rapidly. Therefore, if there's any layers of rock that have fossils in them, they had to be laid down rapidly. not over millions of years. And that's what the whole geologic column, which doesn't exist anywhere in the world besides in the textbooks, it's a mental construct. And it's the New Testament again for the evolutionists. And what you're not being told is go out to Grand Canyon and you'll notice that 7 of the 12 layers are missing. And how about those 2 at the bottom there? The Silurian and the Ordovician. Where did those go? That's 70-some million years. What happened there? See, it's a construct that does not make sense. This is what happens when a flood happens. Worldwide layers of rock like that. That's a worldwide flood, not millions of years, not at all. And here's something in text 10th grade book says, as sediments build up, they bury dead organisms that have sunk to the bottom. You have a body of water, okay? Well, do dead fish sink? You ever have a goldfish? You ever go fishing? You ever seen a dead fish? Is it at the top or the bottom? They go belly up. Things bloat and float. They don't sink to the bottom. So here's another error in their logic. And this is a fossilized skeleton or jellyfish. They took this picture at ICR back before they had the museum. Brian Thomas gave us a tour and it was just phenomenal. What a nice guy he was. And they got this fossil because Darwin said that only animals with hard parts can become a fossil, like bones and teeth and shells. He said if a soft animal cannot become a fossil. So they bought this one just because Darwin was wrong. Again, he's wrong a lot, and the evolutionists are wrong. And this is at the Creation Museum. You see how the fossil dragonfly looks like the modern dragonfly. And what I wish they would do there is put the scientific terms for both of them. Because if I was a betting man, I'd bet a lot that they're not the same. They're not the same. Evolutionists are going to think they're totally different genus, totally different species. And why would I think that? Because that's what Dr. Carl Werner found in his second book, Living Fossils. He went through and he took all these pictures in museums and he took the pictures of live ones and fossil ones, and he found some that look identical, but the words in the red there, that's what the scientific term is for them, 2 Latin words, one for genus, one for species. So scientists don't think they're the same genus or species, even though you got such a variety of dogs. You got big dogs, little dogs, squished in nose, long nose, such a big variety within that species. And yet you get something that looks almost identical and they call it something else. And they look identical. They don't think it's the same genus or species. Again, it looks the same, but they don't think it's the same. Okay, and he's got a whole book like that. And this is what Mark Pagel stated. But instead of finding the slow, smooth, and progressive changes Lyell and Darwin had expected, they saw in the fossil record rapid bursts of change. New species appearing seemingly out of nowhere, then remaining unchanged for millions of years. Patterns hauntingly reminiscent of creation. Yeah, hauntingly reminiscent of creation, because, that evolution tree we just saw, there's no evidence for that at all. But what we do find is a creation orchard. We find it in the biology today and in the fossils that we find the horse kind, the dog kind, the cat kind, the dinosaur kind. Yeah, and so what we find in the ground is validating what the Bible says. The Bible it's talks about biology. Everything produces after their kind. The seed is in itself. Those are scientific terms, and that's what we see in the real world. It talks about geology. There's a worldwide flood, and that's what we see. It talks about anthropology, how God, scattered their language at the Tower of Babel. They confused their languages and scattered them across the earth. That's how we get the different people groups. And so, yeah, the Bible's accurate. That's a perspective of the past that makes sense. It really does. It colors in the details. That's the videotape of what happened, but the blind chance is wrong a lot. And then you got the coelacanth. That was the index fossil for dinosaurs way back when. And it says, well, they didn't see them in any of the other layers, so it must be died out with the dinosaurs. And then they found them still alive. Yeah. But they called them a different scientific term, different genus, different species, par for the course. And speaking of dinosaurs, they supposedly went extinct 65 million years ago, but they found blood cells in their bones. This is from a T-Rex femur. Listen to Mary Schweitzer explain how she's utterly surprising, shocked that they would be there. That's because you have a long age perspective. The creationists, we had no problem with it. It's like, yeah, of course it would be there. They're only thousands of years old. That's no problem. But the evolutionists are shocked. Just listen to her admit how all the science doesn't allow for this.
Is that amazing to find this kind of soft tissue in a fossil this old? And what can the soft tissue really tell us?
Well, it's very amazing. It's utterly shocking, actually, because it flies in the face of everything that we understand about how tissues and cells degrade. It's not something that any one of us could ever predict or hope for.
Yeah, they couldn't predict or hope for that. It is just shocking. And then this next clip, they're going to say it's fact of 70 million years, fact of 70 million years. They'll look at everything and say, well, we can't figure it out, but they will not change the date of the dinosaurs. Change the date, it all fits. But you can't change the date because that's the New Testament for the evolutionist. And if they've misstated the dinosaur, they've misstated everything, and their whole thing comes falling apart. So they have to keep sweeping it under the rug. But listen to what they say.
Is the fact that this stuff was fossilized as it was, of 70 million years old, you don't expect to find soft tissue, do you?
Not at all. No, it was utterly shocking.
So you have to sort of rewrite the book as far as fossilization goes, I assume.
Well, that's the exciting part for me. I've always been very intrigued by how things change in going from a living being to part of the rock record. And like I said, a lot of our science doesn't allow for this. All of the chemistry and all of the molecular breakdown experiments that we've done don't allow for this. So if this material turns out to be actual remnants of the dinosaur, then yes, I think we will have to do some certainly rethinking of some of the basics of the model of fossilization.
You know, well, Mary, when I was reading about this story, I was amazed that in some of the capillaries, when you went to pull them, they snapped right back. Are you amazed at the quality of these remains?
Absolutely.
70 million years old, huh?
It's just doesn't seem possible. But yes, you can actually take the vessels, and they do have internal components, and so you can take a probe and kind of squeeze those things out into solution, and the vessels are fine. It's just I can't explain it, to be honest.
Yeah, she can't explain it because she believes in millions of years, but a creationist can explain it. You know, dinosaurs were made on day 6 with the other land animals. 2 of every kind got on the ark. They were young, so they could still fit in the door. And then there's a worldwide flood that killed all the other dinosaurs outside the ark and buried a lot of them in mud and turned them into fossils. And then they got off the ark, and people called them dragons. And they killed them and carved them into castles and caves. And we see that they have legends of them. So that's a biblical perspective. It makes all the sense in the world. Of course, you're going to find blood cells there and stretchy things. But if you believe in millions of years, now you got a problem. You got a big problem. And this is Mark Armitage. He ran a real expensive lab at the University of California in Northfield, I believe it is. And he found some, in a Triceratops horn, he found some some bone cells. That's what you're looking at there, bone cells. And those cannot last millions of years. And he got it published in Acta Histochemica. He got a call that said, you realize this is controversial. And he didn't say anything about interpreting it. He just said, hey guys, look what I found. He goes, yeah, I know it's controversial. And what happened to him? They fired him. That's right. He sued him for wrongful termination and he won, but he's not teaching there anymore. So who really won? And now he's finding dinosaur nerves. I've seen them with my own eyes. There's dinosaur nerves that cannot last millions of years. And he's got photographs of his stuff on Microscopy Today. Universities don't want them. It's just a witch hunt going on. Okay, and this is, and if you're interested in more of the witch hunt, there's 3 volumes by Dr. Jerry Bergman, and also a video called "Expelled: No Intelligence Allowed." So if you want to see what the high priests of education do when you kick the sacred cow, that's what they have to do, because evolution is falling apart. It's just a matter of time. And so, in this, thinking about evolution, this is the textbook again. The humpback whale is actually more closely related to the hippopotamus than the elephant. Why is this so? And now this is a declarative statement. Millions of years of mutations and change have given rise to both species from a common ancestor. Now that's a blind chance belief system of the past, and it is not true. It is not true. And it's not just me saying that we should be skeptical of it. It's over 1,200 other PhDs, or 1,200 PhDs that say they agree with this. We are skeptical of the claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination of the evidence for Darwinian theory should be encouraged. This is from dissentfromdarwin.org. And there's 28 pages of these guys. And these aren't just your puff PhDs. These are PhDs in chemistry from Harvard, a PhD in organic chemistry from MIT, a PhD in physics from Princeton, and it goes on and on and on. And there's 28 pages of this. And I went to our Senator Putnam's open town hall meeting and I listened, and I was able to talk to him afterwards about this topic here. And I got his card and I emailed him. And I said, when you teach kids evolution, can you teach them this fact that there's over 1,200 PhD scientists that disagree with what they were just taught? Can they be exposed to that fact that there's some really smart people that don't swallow the evolution Kool-Aid? And then this says evolution is the unifying theme in biology by most scientists. Well, yeah, it better be, or they're going to fire you. They got that witch hunt going. And I don't think it is actually the unifying theme. I think epigenetics, that's what really, 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 I think explains things. That's a modification of gene expression rather than the alternation of the genetic code itself. And there's a way to turn them on and turn them off. It's not just random. And ICR is doing incredible work with continuous environmental tracking. And they look at organisms and animals as they are engineered. They didn't just come together by chance. They look at it with engineering principles. And then they look at them and think, you know what, there's sensors in these organisms that sense the environment. And they turn on and off these genes, and so they can adapt to the environment. They'll turn off the eyes and the pigment if fish is being developed in a cave, and they'll turn on the eyes if they're not. And that's a whole nother talk. But these words on the left there, or on the right, rapid, regulated, repeatable, reversible, targeted, predictable. That's not blind chance. That shows up in creation literature, and it shows up in evolution literature. The president of ICR, Dr. Randy Galuza, he says he's got a file with over 200 papers that show these words. It's not blind chance. The blind chance perspective of the past is wrong, and it's got the evolutionists so bothered that they came up with the third way of evolution.com. Other mechanisms are essential for a comprehensive understanding of evolutionary processes, and they're looking for alternative ideas of the evolutionary process. Well, why do you need alternative ideas? Because clearly your ideas that you have don't work. Yeah, that's a tough one. Shout that one. The evolutionist emperor has no clothes. But how do you get people to believe that the emperor has clothes? It's the way you ask questions. This could be an assignment in our school district. Explain the relationship between humans and mice. So if a student wrote down humans were made to make humans, and mice were created to make mice, and humans have dominion over the mice, you think they'll get credit for it? That didn't show up in the sample response. It says humans and mice are both mammals. And just a couple of weeks, I heard Denzel Monk speak, and you can hear this on TCCSA's YouTube channel. But in there, he says he was in a debate with an evolutionist, and that person called him a mammal. He said, "I'm not a mammal." And she laughed at him. And he said, "I'm not a mammal." The Bible, because mammal links people to animals. And he said, the Bible never links people to animals. People are made in the image of God. Animals are not. And he said, we have to stop letting the evolutionists define the terms. And then he quoted 1 Corinthians 15, where it talks about different flesh. There's a different flesh for fish, and a different flesh for birds, and a different flesh for beasts, and a different flesh for people. And that's true. Now that if you hit something with your car, they'll be able to tell from what's on the car whether it's a beast or a person. It's the Bible's true. When it talks about stuff, when it talks about science, it's right. But also, how can you, these going on here, it's genetic testing, fossils of common ancestors. What's the fossil of a common ancestor between a human and a mouse? Oh my goodness, talk about imagination there. And comparative anatomy, also known as homology, homologous structures. And it says the forelimbs of different vertebrates show the similar structure derived from a common ancestor. No, I would say it's from a common designer. And I'll prove there's a common designer. I'll prove it. Otherwise, you have to believe the most absurd things. And I don't like to believe absurd things. Let's take a look at this. Bats and whales have identical genes specifying echolocation. Okay, what's the common ancestor there? There's no common ancestor between a bat and a whale. No, and for an echolocation is so sophisticated. Incredibly, it's not just going to pop into existence. And for it to happen once is amazing. To have it happen twice is amazing. And that brings us to the eye. Oh, well, before the eye, we got convergent evolution explains similarities between unrelated organisms. Well, that's just a word saying that, but that doesn't say how it happened. You know, it's incredibly difficult to evolve once, much less twice. And now let's go to the eye. Charles Darwin. He said, to suppose that the eye, with its intimidable controversies, blah, 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 could have formed by natural selection seems, I confessed, absurd in the highest degree. And I agree. It is absurd to think that the eye came about by chance. It's absurd. And but what do evolutionists have to believe? They have to recognize the eye must have risen independently at least 30 times. It's not just once, not twice. You know, once was absurd. Twice is really absurd. 3 is incredibly absurd. 30 times, I don't even know what kind of word that would be. You have to have the incredible imagination to think that that happened once or happened 30 times. And then bioluminescence, like the stuff that's in fireflies and these and other things, and echinoderms and squid and fish, these things glow in the dark, and now they're starting to put it in plants so it'll glow at night, and they might even put them in people. It's called luciferase or something. Yeah, luciferase. Yeah, it means light bearer, and there's lights that you're gonna be able to see. So the technology, oh man, I'm very concerned with the technology and how it could be used in the wrong hands. But this bioluminescence, incredibly complex, has arisen at least 40 to 50 times in the evolutionary history. So that's incredibly absurd also. Okay, let's get out to outer space. Dark matter and dark energy. They have to have some sort of invisible matter out there, otherwise these stars would not continue to follow their orbits. And I think they're talking about spiral galaxies because they got those spiral arms coming out from the middle. And if those were millions of years old, they'd be all wrapped up. There wouldn't be any more arms. But instead of saying, hey, we haven't been here millions of years, they have to imagine dark matter to make them stay in that spot. And dark matter accounts for about 23% of the universe. And then dark energy. The expansion of the universe was actually accelerating. Yeah, so our universe is expanding at an accelerating rate. They can't explain it. And so they come up with some unknown cosmic force that is counteracting gravity. Well, I know what it is. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and he stretched out the heavens. But they call it dark energy, and that's 73% of the known universe. So 96% of the universe is unknown, dark matter or dark energy. And if you have a theory that's supposed to explain everything and it can only explain 4% of things, it's time to get a new theory. And the new theory is the hydroplate theory. Yeah, it makes accurate predictions. It's like what's in a comet and how in an asteroid. We'll get to that in a little bit. But here's people yelling, the emperor has no clothes. This is cosmologystatement.org from 2004. And these are Big Bang Today. This is an open letter to the scientific community, and a whole bunch of scientists explained it or signed it. It says the Big Bang theory, the Big Bang today relies on a growing number of hypothetical entities, things that we have never observed. Inflation, dark matter, dark energy are the most prominent examples. Without them, there would be a fatal contradiction between the observations made by astronomers and the predictions of the Big Bang theory. And that's true. Yeah, dark matter, dark energy, inflation. Dr. Danny Faulkner, he was in school and college in the 80s. And in the 80s, they had 100% confidence in the Big Bang. They didn't have dark matter, inflation, or dark energy. And now they added it. And now they have 100% confidence in the Big Bang. It just, okay, well, what's wrong about this one? Yeah, they just keep putting duct tape on it so they don't have to throw it away. But it goes on to say, today, virtually all financial and experimental resources in cosmology are devoted to Big Bang studies. Funding comes from only a few sources, and all the peer review committees that control them are dominated by supporters of the Big Bang. And so it goes on to say that it's self-sustaining, irrespective of the scientific validity of the theory. Okay, so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, the Big Bang's got to be true because nobody else can. There's nothing else out there. That's because you only fund Big Bang projects, just like evolution. You know, I was talking to a student at St. Cloud State, and he said, you know what, evolutionists, they got the funding and the finances and the facilities, but we got the truth. Let the games begin. And we are doing better science. We're not going down that vestigial organ rabbit trail or junk DNA rabbit trail. No, we were designed, and we're starting to win. Okay, we're getting close. This will be the last error that I show you. And again, this is evolutionist. This is a false statement, boldly false. I pointed out, okay, it says the Earth's oldest rock was discovered in 2008 along Hudson Bay. Well, in 2019, NASA came out and said the Earth's oldest rock was found on the moon. And it says that the rock crystallized about 20 kilometers beneath Earth's surface. Okay, so how do you get a rock 12 miles below the surface onto the moon? Okay, and this is 2019. They're still lying to they should have took it out. And I pointed this out at the school board meeting. I said, there's a theory that shows how these rocks got on the moon. Plus, it explains 25 major features on Earth and in the solar system, and it makes accurate predictions like what's in a comet and what asteroids are made of. And I think the kids would love to hear about it. You know, they'd be excited to learn it. And nobody contacted me. Nobody even wanted to know the name of it. The lack of curiosity in our science departments at St. Cloud State, at our community college, and at our high schools is appalling. They're just what I've realized is these education systems are not education systems, because an education system would want accurate textbooks. These are bureaucracies, and the teachers are not educators. They're bureaucrats that are going to teach whatever the state tells them to teach, even though it's wrong. That's what I've found. But going back to this theory that explains this, it's called the hydroplate theory. And I want you to watch the guy on the bottom right. That's Doug. Okay, because everything she's saying just totally validates what the hydroplate theory would say. And so just watch them. And if you're not familiar with the hydroplate theory, I have a whole playlist for that. But just check this out. Wait. Get some sound here.
So let me know what you think.
This is the most insane space news in a really long time. This asteroid called Bennu is 63 million kilometers away. That's 160 times farther than the moon is. Over the last few years, this spacecraft called OSIRIS-REx traveled all the way there, touched its surface, grabbed a sample, and brought it all the way back to Earth. And what they found in that sample is insane. It's rich in carbon, nitrogen, and organic compounds, all of which are essential to life as we know it, but we've seen that before. The asteroid is also covered in a mineral called serpentine, which looks like this. And these samples look just like the type of rock that we find here in mid-ocean ridges. This is where the stuff from the mantle of the Earth comes up and touches the water. It's underwater. Scientists think that this asteroid could be a chunk of an ancient small ocean world. This could be a piece of an old watery planet that's been traveling through space for billions of years, and we just took a sample of it.
Wow.
What do you think of that?
Wow. Oh my goodness.
We have a few minor tweaks for, first of all, that watery planet, let's call it Earth.
Oh, yeah.
Kevin Lee likes to say. I wanted to get your reaction, Brian, because when I saw that, I'm like, wow, he works for Walt Brown and Real Science Radio and creating a short for us without us having to do all that production effort.
Yeah, she needs to raise, I think. Man.
Well, what everyone just saw on display was an example of a victim of the government schools, a victim of the deceptions and the errors that Brian has uncovered. That girl, to not even consider that this giant water planet is Earth, but that it's been traveling through space for millions of years, is because she has been victimized by exactly what Brian's been uncovering. And it's actually sad. It's sad to see, but it is instructive as to the work we have to do.
Yeah, and you can see the hydroplate theory on my YouTube channel. Okay, so now let's shift gears here. Okay, what's wrong with science? Science has the wrong perspective of the past. It has a blind chance perspective of the past, which is absurd. We didn't get together by blind chance. I was at a community college one time, and long story short, talking to somebody, and I said, she was trying to make points for evolution, and I was making points for creation. And I asked her, and I said, if you went out to your car and you popped the hood and you looked at your engine, would you think that engine evolved? And she said, yeah. She said, technology has evolved to make the engine. And I said, no, not technology evolved. Did that engine evolve? Was that put together by blind chance random processes without intelligence? And she said, oh, yeah, no, it's like clearly there was intelligence. And I said, clearly. And I said, a dead giveaway for intelligent design is multiple parts working together with precision timing for a purpose. Would you agree? And she agreed. And I held up my hand. I said, oh, guess what? Multiple parts working together with precision timing for a purpose. I said, we were designed too. And she laughed, and a student came up to me and said, do you know who that was? And I said, no idea, no clue. She said, that's the biggest, baddest atheist we got on campus. And you kicked her butt. She said, I was texting your comments to my friends. Well, it's not that I'm any smarter than her, but it's because I'm right. Clearly, if an engine couldn't come together by chance, clearly a body couldn't come together by chance. So we got the wrong perspective of the past, and it's holding science back. It's holding us in the dark ages. Okay, and then science is taught as dogma, the consensus. You can't question it. You can't question the consensus, and the consensus has been wrong over and over and over again. Just check out Ignaz Semmelweis. He was persecuted for telling the truth because in 1847, he figured out that you should wash your hands and brush your fingernails in chlorine solution after doing an autopsy and before delivering babies. And his wing of the hospital, his hospital was having a lot less deaths because he had his doctors doing that. And yet he was ridiculed and rejected by his older contemporaries. Sometimes science advances one funeral at a time. And I've seen that. People just don't want to change. So that's why I'm going for the younger people. I'm trying to get the younger people to think and start. And then the Semmelweis reflex. Its long-held ideas can remain entrenched despite potent evidence to the contrary. And people can and do persecute those who challenge the consensus. Again, okay, now this is widespread. Just think of the emperor has no clothes. The emperor doesn't want to, it has to be bottom up. The people on top, they don't want things to fall apart because they got the power. So widespread belief systems seldom change when frequently reinforced by influential institutions such as universities, media, religious institutions, and the scientific and intellectual elite. Those are the guys with the power. They don't want it to change. But when vast numbers of people realize that they've been misled, an intellectual revolution begins. That's what needs to happen. We have to have more and more and more people saying the emperor has no clothes. I don't buy this blind chance perspective of the past. And I'll bring this up at different school booths and stuff. I was at St. Cloud State and they had a job fair or whatever. And I went through and looked at the things and there was somebody from Rochester School District. So I stopped in and I said, are you guys looking for teachers? He said, we're looking for everything. Bus drivers, janitors, teachers, everything. And I said, would you be looking for a creationist to give a creationist perspective in the science class? And I talked about him, things, and he was very receptive and he took my card. And so hopefully watch my videos and hopefully he starts thinking things through. But ask your school district, what perspective of the past do you teach? Is it a blind chance perspective or is it a design perspective? And I did that at our school district in the summer. And I said, do you think that tent got put together by chance or was it designed? And the guy said, that's a tough question. It's like, it's not a tough question. You just don't want the answer. Okay, so what do we do? Now, I don't know how you're wired, but we all need to do something. I think we all need to get informed and inform others. How you do it, I don't know. It's up to you. Whatever God wired you. Some of the things that I've done is I make creation clubs at colleges and in communities. And my goal is to get a creation club in every community and then carpool to the regional creation speakers. And also at churches, you can focus on it in church service. And I've spoken at Sunday school, Sunday service, Wednesday night, Sunday night, youth groups, VBSs, because the churches, and it's so sad, churches divide over theology when we should be uniting against the evolutionists. If we would just stop fighting amongst ourselves and focus on the evolutionists, we could make a big gangway. And also, the fair booth. I love being at the fair booth. A couple $100 and I can be there for days. And I love talking to people outside my bubble. I love seeing what they're going through. And that's my second favorite time of the year. And my favorite time of the year is in December when I go to St. Cloud State with my Bluetooth speaker and I play them Christmas carols. Oh man, that is so much fun. Hey, Merry Christmas. Did you get your free gift that was bought and paid for by Jesus Christ? Anyhow, go to school board meetings, voice your concern, let your neighbors know about these errors. Hopefully somebody wants to run to be a school board member and support them if they do and get active on social media, start sharing these things around. And then also humor. When we can start mocking evolution, that's when things are going to fall apart. And that's what happened with, someone had to say it by Jim Brewer. when he mocked the COVID tyranny, it was hilarious. You can see it on Rumble. Somebody had to say it, and he mocked it mercilessly, and it was hilarious. That's what we need to start doing with evolution, because the emperor just keep going down the street, even though everybody knows he doesn't have any clothes on. So we need to mock him. And this is Tim Hawkins. This is, you can see it on YouTube. It's Atheist Kids song. And here we go. Wait.
Evolution, this I know, for Charles Darwin told me so. Accidentally alive, if you're weak, you won't survive.
That's the logic, right? That's what they're saying.
That is what they're saying. The survival of the fittest means the elimination of the unfit. And that's what Hitler was doing. And this next one.
I am an A. I am an A-T. I am an A-T-H-E-I-S-T. And I have N-O-T-H-I-N-G to give me hope and certainty. And when I D-I-E, I will be A-L-O-N-E.
There you go. So I'm hoping if anybody has any contacts with Brad Stein or Jim Brewer, those guys those are the best at mocking people. They are hilarious. If they ever get their bullseye set on evolution, it's game over. They are hilarious because those things will go viral and people really stop believing the evolutionists. And we're talking about atheism, and I think that's why the big resistance is there for them to take the errors out of the textbooks, because you take the errors out of the textbooks, there's nothing to prop up that faulty theory. And we need to be concerned. I like to use creation to point people to Christ. And that's why there's so much resistance. It's not the creation that bothers people, it's the Christ. And I was at St. Cloud State one time, and a philosophy major came up and talked to me. It's like, hey, what are you doing here? And it's like, well, and we were talking, he said, why do you do this? And I said, if you saw a blind person walking towards a cliff, would you warn them? And he said, yeah, absolutely. And I said, well, that's what I see. I see people who are blinded and they're walking towards a cliff. And if they go over that cliff without Jesus, they're going to spend an eternity in hell. And they can go to hell if they want to, but they're going to have to go by me first. They're going to have to consciously reject Jesus Christ. And they can do that if they want. I don't want them to do that. And so he still believed that they were mutated animals, though. So that's what I think we need to do. I think we need to get people to focus on other people. Their need for a savior is way more important than our comfort or what we want to do. And I think that the world's a mess because there's a battle between God's truth and Satan's lies. And ground zero for that is atheism. And the real battlefield, the ground zero for that is creation versus evolution. And the real battle for that is in our school system. So I hope people step up and get on the school boards and allow people to think, let them see both sides. Okay, let's do some review here. The emperor has no clothes. We looked at the deceptions of evolutionists. They bend their observations in a multitude of ways, and they use false statements and fuzzy words. We looked at what was wrong with science. We have the wrong perspective of the past, which is hypocritical. Hypocritical at the best. And there's too much consensus that can't be questioned, according to Neil deGrasse Tyson. And also there's corruption. People will fudge the data to get the paycheck. And so what do we do? Yeah. There's things coming up this Saturday, February 8th. There's a webinar from 9:30 to 4:30 or 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. This is Central Time. And there's going to have like Stephen Meyer speaking. So you can get informed on Saturday, go into discovery.org/Dallas 2025 and spread the word. These are guys that help you give the ammo just so you can stand up to the evolutionists. And then also Dr. Carl Werner, he's going to be speaking this month on Tuesday, February 18th. And his talk is titled 2024, the year evolution was overturned. And I can't wait for this one. And you can get a Zoom link for that at tccsa.tc. That's TCCSA, stands for Twin Cities Creation Science Association, .tc. And I encourage you to spread that around on your social media. And yeah, he just does a great work. And then you can see more of these talks. I think this is a kind of a hidden nugget, a hidden gem on the internet, the TCCSA YouTube channel. It's all broken up into topics. The playlists are, you got biology, geology, anthropology, astronomy, history, apologetics. It's all right there. So you can see what creationists have to say about those topics. And then you can get all the information so you can make an informed decision. And then if you're looking for a relaxing vacation, mini vacation, if you want to see the Grand Canyon and let everybody, not worry about driving there or rental cars or hotels or tickets or rafts or anything, let them take care of it. Go into creationtoday.org/Grand Canyon. That's creationtoday.org/Grand Canyon. And it's going to be Helmut Wilkie and Russ Miller, I believe, and Eric Hovind. Man, I think it'd be a lot of fun. So check that out, spread that around so that people can see a biblical perspective. And again, I've got a YouTube channel here called Solidify Your Faith. And if you want to do a creation club at your community, you can say, I don't know what to do. Well, just play some of my stuff. That's what Creation Science 101. We started last January and we're just doing, creation basics. And so you can just play this at your meet at the public library or a church or a business or a home, wherever you can, and then just start reaching out and helping people understand that there's a better perspective of the past and that the emperor has no clothes. And so we started out with creation basics, where that's where we compared the blind chance perspective against the creation perspective. And I don't call them evolutionists or big bangers anymore. I call them blind chancers. You believe in blind chance. That's what your belief system is. And then the second one, CS 102. And if you do this, Creation Science 101 will have the introduction in it. CS 101, which is farther down in the playlist, will just start. There won't be any introduction. Same thing with CS 102 or CS 103. And CS Creation Science 102, that'll show you a whole bunch of really neat websites that have really fun videos that kids would enjoy, and I enjoy them, and I play them at St. Cloud State sometimes. And CS 103 is the How Old is the Earth? And we do take a look at different Bible versions. So if you're showing this at a church, you might want to look at that one before you show it and see if you agree. And then CS 104 is the hydroplate theory. And well, actually not CS1. I bumped that in there, but long story short. And so anyhow, that's it for today. We need more people to start shouting from the mountaintop, the emperor has no clothes, just like the leading atheist Thomas Nagel is doing. We need everybody to do that. And with that, my presentation is done. Thank you for bearing with me. And I'm open to questions now. I will stop sharing.
My brother, Brian Lauer, that was an excellent presentation, as I predicted. Very comprehensive. I like that you touched on all the major topics. Brian, the hominin fossil record, whale evolution. I liked the flow of your presentation as well. You touched on embryology, differences between humans and chimpanzees, the impossibility of chemical evolution. Brian, you said there at the end that they believe in blind chance. It's a pseudoscientific religion is what it is. They have a lot of evolutionary philosophy, but not much empirical science. They believe time, matter, and space came forth from nothing. They try to redefine nothing, of course, Lawrence Krauss style. They believe non-living chemicals form themselves into the first self-replicating molecule. And they believe that all life is related, including banana plants, you, me, chimpanzees, whales. And so you did an excellent job showing why that, Brian.
Well, praise God.
Science.
Praise
I like
God,
I like that you even got into dinosaur soft tissue, Mark Armitage's work. Mary Schweitzer as well, the bias in science. So very detailed, Brian, and definitely a lot to discuss. We've had some excellent questions come in.
Good.
One specific point that you focused on that I really appreciated, because we have a lot of questions that have come in from evolutionists.
Good.
It's a common one. They'll argue for their position by looking to homology, right? Similarities across the biological world.
Yeah.
I like to say creationists, we can explain the similarities due to common design, common templates, but it's the differences that make all the difference. Creationists, we can explain, right, Brian, similarities and differences.
Right.
The evolutionists, they struggle with the differences because many of those differences are too massive for them to account for. One that you pointed to were the differences in the genomes of humans and chimpanzees, specifically the Y chromosome. What's interesting before I get into the Y chromosome is the genome as a whole, even in your sections that are similar between humans and chimpanzees, there's differences in the way those genes are regulated, the way they're used, the way they're expressed. So even in the similar regions, there's massive differences that they can't account for. Like in the brain, for example, our genes are regulated much different than the chimpanzee. But the Y chromosome that you touched on, the Y chromosome, when you consider overall architecture, size differences, and gene content, Brian, I wanted to show you in the audience an image because your points on that were fantastic. And going back years ago, 2013, 2012, you pointed to a couple papers from Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins.
Yes.
PhD geneticist. And so the Y chromosomes were thought to be roughly 35, maybe 40% similar back then. And it's really cool because you can see on this visual, and I appreciate all the visuals in your presentation. I think that's helpful for me, for the audience. I'm a visual learner, Brian, my brother. And so here you've got the great ape Y chromosomes all compared. They got humans in here, of course. They think we're a great ape, but the differences are too large. And so these are Y chromosomes. Notice your human Y right here versus the chimpanzee Y. Right off the bat, it's half the size.
Wow.
Gene content, totally different. This right here, this is, I mean, this alone precludes evolution. What that means is it makes evolution impossible because how can the evolutionary model account for these differences? This piece of DNA here, it's all color coded. This is called heterochromatin. This is densely packed DNA, largely comprises satellite sequences. It's functional, it's beneficial. You'll notice the heterochromatic arm in the chimpanzee is not even there, but yet humans have a ton of it.
Wow.
Totally different. And so the evolutionary community, they like to argue from a nested hierarchical pattern, right? Why are humans more similar to chimpanzees than any other creature? Well, in the Y chromosome, this is cherry picking because in the Y chromosome, you'll actually notice, Brian, the human Y is more similar to the gorilla Y over here than either are to the chimpanzee Y and the bonobo Y. There's a break in their so-called nested hierarchy. So my point is, and this brings me to my first question to you, Brian. It's the differences that make all the difference. So they want to argue, and I'll put up one of the questions here, and we do appreciate our critics. Okay.
Yeah.
So here, an honest doubter. We appreciate our critics, the feedback, the skepticism, and we're here to engage your questions and challenges. So he says, not that I believe it proves evolution. So he's, I think, basically saying this is just a supporting line of evidence, perhaps, because the evolutionary community, they'll say it's cumulative. We have this evidence, this piece of evidence over here, and it comes together to one conclusion, common descent, they'll say. And so he says, but what is your explanation for simians being most similar biologically to mankind more than any other creature? Is it the same template? So yeah, in other words, Brian, the question is, why are humans more similar in many ways, genetically, morphologically, in anatomy, to the great apes and monkeys than any other form of life, like dogs or fish?
I would say that's the way God made them. That's the way God made us. You know, God's got a great imagination, as if, you know, when you look at all the animals in the world, what an amazing imagination he has with the colors and the design. So I would just say that's God's design, how he wanted it.
Amen. Amen. And you could do the same thing with man-made objects. Take modes of transportation. They're designed by man, human engineers, but we could do the same thing. We could take all sedans, hatchbacks, and let's say a boat or an airplane. Well, it just so happens there's a nested hierarchy there, isn't there, Brian? Where sedans are more similar to hatchbacks than they are to a boat or an airplane. So I would say hierarchies, the fact that humans are more similar to chimps than they are to even monkeys, dogs, or fish, that's characteristic of design. As you said, that's the way God created. He created the biological order hierarchically. And Brian, if you were to pick an animal in the biological world, doesn't that animal then have to be more similar to another creature than to other creatures? Like, isn't that just basic? Isn't that just by definition, any creature has to be more similar to something than it is to another?
Well, if you said pick an animal, I would say the platypus. That's what popped into my mind.
Yeah.
You
There's an
know,
interesting mosaic.
it's like, well, that came from everything. You know, I think God did that just to make the evolutionists scratch their head. It's like, man, this theory really doesn't work for that one.
Right, just to show how silly evolutionary theory is.
Right.
We have a friend of the channel here. It's a critic, but you know what, Lorraine? Allow us to keep working on you, and you'll be a creationist in no time. So she proves my point here, Brian. She says, well, let's look at the X chromosomes. Sure.
Oh, good. Yeah. What's that? 69% similar, 59% similar.
Yeah. So even if they're more similar to each other, so they are right here. So they are more, the X chromosomes are more similar to each other in humans and chimps than the Ys. You can see that visually. But my whole point is, and the point we're trying to make as creationists, is similarities do not equate ancestry or common descent. Similarities can go either way. It's agnostic. It's like saying, well, creation is true or evolution is true, Brian, because the sky is blue or the earth is round. Well, largely both models can account for the data. It's the differences that make all the difference. How do the evolutionists, Brian, explain these massive differences in Y chromosomes in just 6 to 10 million years since the split? And this is what I really wanted to show you, Brian. In 2024, so Dr. Carl Werner, he said 2024 was the year.
Yeah.
And you pointed this out in your presentation brilliantly.
Yeah.
2024 was the year that evolution was overturned. And he's so right in many ways. So we had Carl on for a 3-part series.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So I highly recommend people check it out.
Yeah.
It was comprehensive. It was informative, and it was irrefutable. That series, we've had it out now for about 6 months. And the critics, which we get a lot of them, they have not been able to counter it. They have not been able to engage it.
No, they can't. They cannot. Those books are so well documented. I mean, his bibliography is like 300 pages. He's translated it all. It's just, he did a lot of work, and I can't see how they could refute it. I do not see how.
No, they can't. They can't. Well documented. The evidence really is fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
And so in the world of genetics, right here, 2024, they got even more sophisticated data and analyses of the Y chromosomes, Brian. And did it get better for the evolutionists? No, it actually got worse. So if you compare down here, I'll just hide this. Human. So here's your human, and here's your chimpanzee. So you can go right up and compare each one. 26.2%. And so your human Y chromosomes and your chimpanzee Y chromosomes, they're less than 30% the same. So with more sophisticated Y chromosomal sequencing data, Brian, and I hope the evolutionists are listening, it's actually worse. It's worse for them. And so these kinds of differences, they preclude their theory or their philosophy from being true.
Wow. That's stunning. You know, and yet they still have that 1.6% in the textbook today. It's like, it's just so frustrating. But, you know, it's a lot of fun getting people up to speed, because when you can connect the dots for them, they'll never see the world the same again. And who knows who they'll be. Maybe that's the next Ken Ham. Maybe it's the next, whoever. But wow. Yeah. That's exciting.
Well, and that's the thing. When they show the whole genome, the genome in its entirety, the Y chromosome with your autosomal nuclear DNA, you know, because your nuclear DNA has 3 billion letters, 6 billion total. You get 3 from mom, 3 from dad. And so your genome as a whole, yeah, humans and chimpanzees are a lot more similar than just 30%. But again, we can account for similarities due to common design. But when we pick out the differences, like in the Y chromosome, that's where only the creation model can account for it, right, Brian? We can account for the differences because we don't say that humans and chimpanzees are related. It's the evolutionists that want to argue that chimpanzees and humans go back to a common ancestor. We don't say that.
Right. And the animal or creature that I like the evolutionist to explain is the monarch butterfly. Explain to me how it goes from a caterpillar to a chrysalis. You know, caterpillars don't have any reproductive organs. So it's got to get all the way through that chrysalis if it wants to survive into the next generation. Wow. And how does it liquefy itself and put itself back together by blind chance mutations? I'll wait.
Right. Yes, we will.
You know,
I want to see in the chat. I want to see the best explanation for that.
Yeah, by blind chance. Because if you get 50% way through, it's not going to help. You're dead. You can't reproduce. You could even get 99% of the way through. You're still not going to be able to reproduce. You got to get all the way through. And let's see you do that by blind chance.
It's so true when the Bible says that those that reject God reject the creation, which indicates a creator. You pointed that out in your presentation. You'd have to be willingly ignorant.
Bingo. Bingo. Yes. Willingly ignorant. Yep. Dumb on purpose.
Yeah. In the Greek, that means dumb on purpose. So the Lord's Day ministry says energy cannot be created or destroyed. Yeah. So the first law, matter and energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So where did matter and energy come from? Well, the second law, right, Brian, is the law of increasing entropy. Everything's winding down. So if you wind things back up to a starting point, but matter and energy can't be created nor destroyed, that means matter and energy had to come into existence from an outside force supernaturally. There's God right there.
Right. And you see things falling apart. You see in our DNA falling apart with mutations. So you see good information going bad. Well, the question is, where did the good where did the good information come from? You know, they asked Richard Dawkins, can you give us an example of how information is added to the genome? And it was a real long pause, about 20 seconds. And he said, stop recording. You can search that on the YouTube. But yeah, they don't have the answers. And it's basically, we just need to help people see it. And I think people, especially after these last few years, they want to see both sides of the story. They're sick of being told what to believe. And I think students are sick of that too. And so that's why we start the creation science clubs. And it's a lot of fun giving those talks on campus. And, you know, and more often than not, somebody will come up and say, you know, thank you for doing this. I was beginning to doubt the Bible because I was learning in biology. And so, you know, we got the answers, they got the questions, but they're not getting, you know, people have questions. It reminds me of, I was talking to a woman at the community college, and she said that her niece or her daughter was going through confirmation. So she asked the priest about dinosaurs. And I asked, well, what did he say? And she said, I don't remember, but it didn't make her happy. You know, it's just pretty much believe it because I said so.
Right.
And so then she concluded that either Adam and Eve are false or dinosaurs are false. So she had a good question and got a bad answer and came up with a bad conclusion. And I said, well, Adam and Eve are true and dinosaurs are true. The thing that's false is millions of years. Get that out of the equation, then it all makes sense. And I was able to plug her into a dinosaur talk. So hopefully that helped her. But that's one of the big problems we got. We got churches that teach evolution, which mainly says that basically says God didn't do what he said, or at the very least, he didn't mean what he said. And if he didn't mean what he said, why bother with any of it, you know?
Right.
So we have to get back. If we could just get the pastors to believe what God said and stop bickering amongst themselves and focus on the real enemy, I think we could have a revival in this country.
Amen. That's why what you're doing, what other creation ministries are doing, is so important, because a legit question like that, if given a bad answer, could turn that person off from the truth.
Well, yeah, that's Yeah, that's what Ken Ham, he wrote a book on that called Already Gone, where 2/3 of our kids stop going to church. 2/3 of conservative church kids stop going to church and when they leave home. And so he did a survey and he asked them, well, why is that? And it was basically because they doubted the Bible true. And then they asked, well, when did you start to doubt? And it was mainly middle school and high school, because that's when the Big Bang and evolution are being taught as dogma. And so we have to equip students to be prepared for that. And you know, how did life begin? Where did matter come from? Those are two showstoppers for the evolutionists. And Genesis apologetics, they have a really good classroom series, and they're only a minute long at the most, but they're really, really well done. And do we need people to ask questions in class? Because that helps the whole class realize that, hey, this thing isn't settled science. They can't explain how life began, you know? And so that helps the whole class, you know, take it with a grain of salt and not just swallow what they're being spoon fed.
Amen. That's why your section there with Dr. Jonathan Sarfati, that was an excellent section. That was an important section. And the problems and challenges with abiogenesis and chemical evolution, they really are impossible. There's no other explanation or alternative than God, a designer.
Right. It takes way more faith to think hydrogen and helium turn into people. It just takes, I just don't have that much faith. You know, maybe
I don't have that much faith to be an atheist.
yeah. Maybe an atheist can believe that, but I don't put my faith in fairy tales.
It's a fairy tale for adults. I've heard it said.
Is. That's exactly right. I've got a poster that says that too.
Yeah. You know, there are, and I've talked about this on the channel before, there are so many what's called mutually interdependent systems that evolutionists can't account for. One of them, which I like to discuss, and the evolutionary community has no good answer, is the fact that in a single day, Brian, one cell, and we have roughly 60 trillion cells, depending on what the creature is and the person, a single cell can experience a million DNA breaks in a single day.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what came first, the DNA repair system or the DNA?
Right.
And we just had somebody speak at TCCSA, Rod Stadler. There's a thing on YouTube that's called Long Story Short, where they take this and it's animated and it's kind of cartoony, but it explains it, you know, how they take out the old part and they put in the new part, and it's just an incredibly complex, and it's like, oh, that just came about by chance. No.
I'm not actually Dr. Rod Stadler. He's great. We had him on years ago to debunk Professor Dave, if you're familiar.
Oh, good.
So we've got a program out there. Dr. Rod Stadler doing an excellent job.
It's still on your channel? Is it?
You can check it out. Just type in Rod Stadler. He did a series of 3 talks with us. One of them was refuting Professor Dave.
Oh, thank you, Donnie, for doing this stuff, man. I've been looking for debates, especially. I'm going to get some popcorn tomorrow night.
Yeah, get some popcorn, have some fun. It goes back years ago now, and it still hasn't been addressed, but these guys will talk a big game. And so, just like I like to ask them, okay, so what came first, the DNA or the DNA repair enzymes? Because guess what? If you're getting 1 million DNA lesions in a single cell in a single day, well, then you need these amazingly designed DNA repair systems to repair a lot of those, or else we'd go extinct in a couple generations. But the problem for the evolutionists is that the DNA repair enzymes, which repair a lot of these DNA lesions, they're actually encoded in the DNA. So you can't have the DNA without the DNA repair enzymes.
Yeah, there's so many chicken and egg things. I was at a museum by St. Louis, the Mastodon Museum, and I asked them, they had the geologic column there, and I asked them, well, what evolved first, the heart or blood cells? And they said,
there's another good one.
And they said blood cells. And I said, well, what good are blood cells without a heart? And they said, well, a heart. I said,
wow.
I said, well, okay, we'll give it to you. In all the billions of years in this huge universe, we got the first blood cells with the first heart. What good is that without lungs or kidneys? You know, it has to be fully formed or fully functional, or it's dead. And who is it? Fred Williams' son, Ryan, I think, when he was in college, he'd ask people, you know, how did vital organs evolve? You know, if we need them to live, how did we live before we had them?
Right.
And oh man, yeah, it's just we just need to start asking these questions because that helps people realize, hey, the emperor has no clothes.
Oh,
What is-
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of people, they've never heard these points. They've never heard these facts. I'm
Yeah.
saving that one, brother. Heart and blood cells, adding that to the chicken and egg list, which there are many of them.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I did that. We were playing baseball at the park and I did the same thing with the kids. You know, the bird flew into the backstop or the back of a bench and we all kind of run over and look at it.
Mhm.
I said, "Hey guys, where do you think the bird came from?" And they said, "From a nest." And I said, "Well, where did that come? The next bird, you know, where did this bird come from? From his mom, you know, from
Right.
that bird." And I said, "Where did the first bird come from?" And then it was Ben. He said, "God made him." And I said, "You're
Yeah.
right,
You're
but you're
right.
gonna
Yeah.
go you're gonna go to school and they're gonna tell you that they came from pond scum, you
Mhm.
know, and so you got to ask them, you know, how did life begin and stuff." And then I asked them the blood and the heart thing too. And it was interesting to get their ears, their gears going. But, you know, good questions can really, you know, it can diffuse an argument. Or a
Right.
well-placed question can just destroy the other position. And that's what I tend to do at St. Cloud State. You know, I'll just ask them questions. You know, I don't really argue with anybody. I just ask them questions. You know, without life, how did life, or without God, how did life begin? You
Amen.
know, and that helps them realize that it's not settled science. Because if they say, "Oh yeah, scientists have done it in the lab," and then it's like, "Well, how come they didn't claim their $10 million then?" You
Mhm.
know, so it helps the evolutionists realize they have faith too. You know, and that's just one more step. And hopefully they start to think. And you need to see both sides if you want to think. And that's not happening in class. And they agree, you know, so hopefully our club will grow.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Question asking when discussing creation, evolution, and origins, especially to skeptics, it's very important because it helps expose the flaws in evolution. When you're asking questions like that, then it forces them to critically think. And as a result, usually it's, well, yeah, okay, that's a good point. I never thought of that. So that's why asking questions like that are so important. And it's funny, Brian, when you ask these kinds of questions to militant evolutionists,
Yeah.
militant evolutionists, even the PhDs, they're really good at storytelling.
Oh, yeah.
Because they got a
Oh,
PhD
yeah.
in storytelling, right? Their
Oh,
evolutionary
yeah.
mythology. And they'll say,
Oh, yeah.
well, you know, millions of years ago or billions of years ago, you had proto cells or
Yeah.
primitive
Yeah.
cells. It's like,
Yeah.
show me a proto cell today. I want to see this primitive cell today.
Yeah.
I want to see it
Yeah.
in front of me. You know, so it's just a lot of evolutionary. So then maybe that early cell didn't really need the DNA repair systems, but eventually, you see, so then you're
Yeah.
just
Oh,
long
yeah.
ago and far away, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Bob Enyart used to say that the evolutionist who can say the craziest thing with the straightest face, that's the one
Right.
who
Yeah.
gets promoted. The most
We could probably
absurdity.
start a video series or a game show called Evolutionists Say the Darndest Things. One of them, proto cells.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Mutations and
Oh
selection
yeah.
led
Oh
to
yeah.
goo to you, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. ICR has a series on it's just posts on their Facebook page, I believe. Yeah, evolutionists say the darndest things or whatever, and it's
Mhm.
got the quote by oh, who was it? But he would say, even if all the evidence points to a creator, it's rejected because it's not naturalism. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's what that's
Amen.
what they say. That's what they say.
So you mentioned mutations. Here's my next question for you, Brian. They'll say, well, to explain large scale evolution, because firstly, I like to define terms.
Oh,
If
you
they
have to.
if they say, oh,
Yeah.
so you reject evolution, well, if by evolution you mean change over time,
Right, right,
then
right,
nobody, for the most part, disagrees with that. Things change
right,
over time.
right,
But by evolution, what do they mean? They mean the theory of common descent, that single-celled like ancestors evolved into multi-celled ancestors, which evolved into
right,
fish,
right.
amphibians, reptiles, mammals. And so they'll say that that can be done through two of their main mechanisms would be selection and mutation. So my question, Brian, is, does the science support this idea that mutations and selection can take goo to you particles to
No.
people?
No, there's no way that's gonna happen. I mean, if mutations are this great thing, how many people wanna have a mutated baby? You know, if mutations were so great, we should be excited to get nuclear waste in our house and in our drinking water. Mutations
Yeah.
are, most of them are they're neutral, but you get enough of them, it's like rust, and then also there's way more deadly mutations than beneficial ones. There's a lot more things that'll make your car go wrong and stop than make it get better.
That's right.
If you like this blind chance stuff, just give a teenager a bunch of socket sets in a garage and have them rip apart your car and put it together and see if it's any better. And it's like if I had a booklet, if I had a booklet of how to make a skateboard, and all I did was just every time I copied it, there'd be spelling errors, there'd be duplicates, there'd be deletions, and that's mutations, copying errors. Is that process going to turn a skateboard into a space shuttle?
Never.
There's no way. And there's no way. And they expect that to turn a single cell into a person? No. I don't have enough faith for that one.
Well, it's an excellent answer. And a lot of the lesser informed evolutionists.
Oh, and also back to natural selection too.
Yeah.
It explains the survival of the fittest. It doesn't explain the arrival of the fittest.
That's right.
It cannot explain where it came from, And then there's limits to the changes that can happen too. They'll say the small gradual changes, that'll add up to big changes. Well, that's like saying if the cow jumped a little bit higher every day, eventually it's going to jump over the moon. There's limits to the kinds, how far they can change.
You nailed it. And you can show them this right from their literature. This is from a paper, Kitely and Lynch, toward a realistic model of mutations affecting fitness. Because you mentioned most of them are neutral. And it's interesting because most of them are neutral, but they're actually nearly neutral. Like you said, it's much like how rust builds up over time on a car. Each single rust molecule is inconsequential, but they build up over time, and eventually the car it's no longer working. It degenerates, just like the genome. And right from their literature, notice what they say. In summary, the vast majority of mutations are deleterious. But the problem for them is those deleterious mutations, they're nearly neutral. So selection can't see them. Selection can't act upon them. So they're subject to drift. They spread. What do they do, Brian? They degenerate.
Yeah. And then even if there was a beneficial one, there's a Haldane's dilemma. How long is it going to take for that to get through the population? There's just not enough time to get the chimps to humans or anything really.
Yeah, exactly what they'll say is, but once in a while we get a beneficial mutation that can drive forward evolution. And here are a few that they bring up. One of them that you're probably familiar with, as it's a common one, is sickle cell anemia.
Yeah.
That this mutation makes people resistant to malaria, the malaria parasite.
Yeah, it's like if you lose all your teeth, you can't get cavities,
Yeah.
Or if you cut off your feet, you don't get athlete's feet.
Right, exactly.
It's not a benefit. You don't want to have sickle cell anemia.
It would be like if there is a group of us that were about to go to jail and everyone's being handcuffed, but I decided to cut off my hands and now I can escape. Yeah. There's a short-term advantage, but I'm probably going to get caught eventually. And so,
yeah. You had other beneficial ones. I am not familiar with those. I don't know if you want to put those up again.
Yeah, of course.
I want to take a screenshot of that.
So HIV resistance, antibiotic resistance, the long-term evolution experiment, Lenski's experiment, that's a major one they look to.
Yeah, but it doesn't change anything into anything else. It's you got viruses producing viruses, it's nothing different. Flies producing flies, it's nothing big. It's not the big changes. We say, I agree with the minor changes, the variation within a kind, but it's the big changes that I have issue with, that they can't document anywhere. Or they might document it, but they can't prove it. They haven't found it.
Yeah, they'll say, well, these bacteria, these nylon digesting bacteria, they'll say this has to be new information or a large scale change because the bacteria could not digest nylon before. Nylon's introduced, it's man-made, and now they can digest it. And so this is due to beneficial mutation accumulation that led to this novel gain in function.
And I would ask him, what did you start with? Bacteria. What did you end with? Bacteria.
Right. Yeah.
It's nothing different. I mean, it's variation within a kind.
And then they'll say, well, that's what evolution would predict. Bacteria producing bacteria, dogs producing dogs. They call that the law of monophily. You'll never outgrow your ancestry.
No, yeah, that's what the Bible says too. Everything produces after their kind. They're getting closer.
That's right. Yeah. Well, it's funny. I did a deep dive on all of these examples. The nylon digestion one, this is from Evolution News. So Discovery Institute, you were showcasing their upcoming conference. And they said a protein that already has a low level of activity for a particular substrate can be mutated to favor that side reaction over its original one in just a few steps. And so basically the pre-existing ability for that function to digest nylon was pre-existing.
Yeah.
And here they point out bacteria from a diverse set of environments have the pre-existing ability to digest nylon waste products. So I would argue that, yeah, God gave his creation a huge amount of variety.
Oh yeah.
To experience adaptive episodes throughout history.
Oh yeah. And then the ICR's continuous environmental tracking, that's another game changer. How it's rapid. It's rapid adaptation, not a blind chance. Right? It's amazing. And that'd be, I don't know if you could ever get Dr. Galuza on this show, but boy, oh boy, he hits it out of the park.
Well, it's analogous to this. You'll see these vehicles these days, right, Brian? I mean, you go back 30, 40, 50 years ago, you don't have these built-in safety mechanisms or backup cameras. I mean, now you can get a vehicle, let's say from Volkswagen or Honda or Hyundai, where you're on the expressway. And if you start to swerve into the other lane, you have an adapter in there where it's called lane, where basically just puts you right back into the right lane. So these are all built in because of the environment. And yet we're finding in the biological order the same thing. You have these fish that rapidly enter the cold water, and then a pre-existing function is manifested. It's all built into the system. Isn't that right, Brian?
Yeah. Yeah. They're designed to be able to adapt to the environments. And it's not by chance. That's what they're finding. That's regulated. It's rapid. It's repeatable. It's predicted. It's just incredible. And evolutionists, again, that's why they came up with this. I believe that's why they came up with the third way of evolution, because mutations and natural selection don't do it.
Right.
And so we got the truth. And I think we're starting to get the wind at the sails too. People are a lot more questioning of the authorities and the experts now.
And then people are waking up. People are waking up to the truth.
Yeah.
I like to point out, so even if, Brian, because what I see with all of the so-called beneficial mutations that they put forth in my study, we also did a couple-hour program with Dr. Jerry Bergman going back maybe five months ago, where we went over all these.
Yeah.
Either they're reductive. What that means is they're functionally compromising to organisms, like sickle cell anemia. When you actually look under the hood, it's due to a deformed hemoglobin molecule. So it's a broken cell, broken information. Okay. Sickle cell anemia is bad. Who wants that? Malaria is also bad. But okay, you have this advantage where people with sickle cell anemia, they're resistant to malaria. But it's literally due to a broken cell. It's reductive. That's not going to take your fish to fisherman, is it, Brian?
No. Yeah. Evolution is happening, but it's in the wrong direction. It's not making us better. It's making us worse.
It's horizontal changes in the genome, but what they need is vertical changes.
Right. Yeah. Because every generation has, I don't know how many more, 100 more mutations than the parents before them.
Yeah.
And so our DNA is going to, and there was a Russian scientist that said, how come we aren't extinct 100 times over, at this mutation rate?
Kondrashov.
That's it. Yeah.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, they're building up. They're not subject to selection. They're drifting. And like you said, some of these so-called beneficials, they're just adaptive. They're adaptive episodes. They're not really adding information. It's just a pre-existing gene or that ability. It's now manifested due to an environmental stressor. So whether it's reductive or whether it's just true adaptation, that's not going to counterbalance the damage being done by all these nearly neutral mutations accumulating, Brian.
Yeah. 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 There's a lot of stuff in our favor, and
And
it's
it's a
fun.
great time to be a biblical creationist.
Oh, no kidding. I'm like with Ken Ham, he didn't have anything. He comes home and he tells his dad they're teaching evolution. He says, "Don't believe it. Don't believe it." And he goes, "But well, how do I defend it?" And he goes, "I don't know. Just don't believe it. Believe the
Right.
Bible." And then Henry Morris came out with his book, and that had the answers, and he started selling that all over Australia. And then it was called to be a missionary to America. And we have so many tools for the creationists right now, that we have
Amen.
so much information. We just need more people doing something with the information. And that's what I really, really appreciate your platform here, to let a free flow of ideas go. And man, I'm really looking forward to going through some of those debates. Oh man, I
Praise
am
the Lord.
so excited for that.
Well, I encourage people to go subscribe to your channel. They can take a deep dive into all your presentations, because your presentations like this one, they're comprehensive, they're packed with information, they're thought-provoking to the skeptic. So I appreciate, Brian, how
Oh, and
up to date you are on
Yeah,
everything.
yeah, and I do get talks that are censored on YouTube, and so I've got a Rumble channel that is called Education Not Indoctrination for the longer ones, and Education Not Indoctrination Clips for shorter ones. Because there was a pastor that in Wisconsin, he said, "Can you do a creation science revival?" And I said, "Well, how about we do Creation Sunday, and we'll do 3 talks, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we'll do a revival of truth, where we looked behind the vaccine curtain on Monday, and Tuesday was the COVID corruption, and then Wednesday was what the global tyrants haven't planned for us." And to his credit, he said, "Yeah." And so you'll be able to see those talks. I give freedom talks, and that'll be on Rumble, Revival of Truth, for that series. And then also Education Not Indoctrination, because we need all the information in every area of life.
Right.
And we are not getting it from our government, and we are not getting it from our media, and we are not getting it from our health officials. And so we need to educate ourselves and educate others in other areas. Because especially after the last few years, it was the globalists, I mean, they pretty much laid their hands down. This is what evolutionists can do. And what really motivated me is when I heard Yuval Harari speak, and I listened to his 2018 World Economic Forum talk. He talks about humans are hackable animals that can be tracked under their skin. And now I look at the technology today, it's like, yeah, they can do that. And then it's just that's what motivated me, because I thought, what can evolutionists do if they really get all the control? I mean, and you go into his website, ynharari.com. Yeah, the first thing you're going to see is history began when humans invented gods and will end when humans become gods.
Right.
And that's what they think. They get rid of God, and then they want to be God. And so again, this battle has big ramifications.
It's Satan's war against humanity.
Yes.
And this war has been going on since the Garden of Eden 6,000 years ago. Henry Morris has a really good book.
Yes.
That covers that war, called the Long War Against God.
Yep. That's what it is. And now it's like you can put a face to it. It's like, this is what they're saying. Yeah. Right. Oh man. And some of those quotes, what was the talk? Prepare for the battle. If you want to see that, Prepare for the Battle on Education Not Indoctrination. That's where we have the Yuval Harari clips, the Klaus Schwab clips. And they've told us what they want to do with their Agenda 2030, with their, the World Economic
Revelation
Forum
of
talks.
The plan. That's probably something we should save for Rumble, so we don't get this.
I forgot about that.
Taken down.
Sorry about that.
That's okay, brother. You're passionate. There's a couple things we're gonna have to go in and remove, unfortunately. But hey, that's what Rumble's for, right? So we got a lot in common there, Brian.
Yeah.
So I did want to let the audience know, because a few people were mentioning it, in terms of beneficial mutations. We just put out a couple articles with Dr. Jerry Bergman. So I worked with Dr. Jerry Bergman on these. He did a debate recently with Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal, Rutgers University professor. And Dan brought up a couple interesting examples of so-called beneficial mutations. One of them suggesting that scales can be converted into feathers. Apparently this is something they observed in the lab. And then another one lizards evolving placentas. So we examined those claims, and I just published these 2 articles on the website that people can check. And so, no, they're not the kind of beneficial mutations that the evolutionists are suggesting. But if you want to take a deep technical dive into why, I do want to recommend people can go download the PDF of each article, and they can see why those are another couple failed examples, brother.
So those scales turning to feathers, was that naturally, or did they do something to the genes to make that do that? Was that a scientist that did it, or did that just happen in nature?
Yeah, good question. If you look at the paper that suggests this was something that they in many ways manipulated. And so the article we put out with Jerry Bergman, he suggests that really all the research did was showed how there's an even larger gap between your scale to feather evolution that selection and mutation simply can't account for. Like, obviously we can do a lot of manipulation in the lab if it's us that are manipulating certain genes, and
Oh yeah,
but that is not necessarily meant to be extrapolated into nature, where now selection and mutations are going to have to drive this process.
Yeah. Wow.
Like you were saying earlier, most mutations deleterious. Selection is a fine-tuning mechanism that keeps a species as strong as it can be.
Yep. Oh yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to digest out there, and there's so much on our side. There's just so much they're sweeping under the rug. We just have to have more people pulling the rug off and exposing it.
Amen. And that's why it's so important to have a team, have a community of informed creationists like yourself, where we can come together and tackle all of their evidence, one line of evidence, and it came in the form of a question in a couple different ways. So Brian, this is asked in several variations. And so they'll argue, well, evolution's true and creation is false, because in the fossil record, and this is their assertion, we have a progressive series, a predictable series from lesser complex, more simple organisms like bacteria, single-celled ancestors, up to humans. So they'll look to basically the ordering in the fossil record. Why don't we find dinosaurs and humans together? Why don't we find dinosaurs and therapsids or something like that? So I guess the question, if I could pose it at you in the way that they would, is how do we as creationists explain the so-called ordering in the fossil record if evolution's not true?
Habitat. How much mud does it take to bury a clam? Okay, and then how about the fish? They can't go to higher ground. Just think of a flood forming with mud coming in it. The fish can't, clams can't run at all. Fish can't run to higher ground. And then you get the reptiles and the lizards and then the mammals and then the birds and the people. And it could be their density too, the bone density too, because also, the liquefaction with the waves going over top, with the water getting pushed into the sediment and then coming back up and pushed in, it could sort things based on their body density also. And so it's, and some of them, I mean, I would ask them, how do you get land animals with marine animals in your fossil record, in the same layer?
Yeah, because you see marine fossils all throughout the fossil record.
Yeah, right next to the land ones. That screams loudly, and some of them it looks like they got in a cement mixer, all the bones in a cement mixer, and it's just these fossil graveyards with no rhyme or reason to them. And what I think might have done that is the animals that are they float and bloat, and they get caught in an eddy somewhere. So they get scavenged and then they fall down and then they get buried. So, I think the fossils are a strong argument for a flood, and it just cannot happen for, millions of years. It cannot be. Those layers have fossils in them, and a fossil only forms when they're buried rapidly. Therefore, those layers were laid down rapidly. That's the only way you got a fossil. So it's not millions of years.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Their typical counter would be, well, if it's burial by habitat, then why don't we find birds and pterosaurs in the same layer? Or why don't we find mosasaurs or megalodon and whales together, because that's the ocean habitat. Birds and pterosaurs are both flying creatures. So wouldn't you expect those creatures to be found together? How would you respond to that, Brian?
Well, yeah, hadn't really thought about that. Maybe they are. But I think the thing that points out to me is, if it is in that habitat, that could be wrong. That could be a misinterpretation of it too. I could be wrong on that. But
well, I would say even in the ocean, you're going to have different communities, different ecosystems. I mean, the ocean's huge, so you would have whales in one ecosystem separate from in the pre-flood world, because we can't make assumptions on ecosystems and where communities are today. We can't take those assumptions, how things are today, and apply them to the pre-flood world. The pre-flood world would have been different. And so you'd have communities in your ocean habitats separated from each other, just like on the land, you'd have communities like mammals and dinosaurs separated by each other, because the real estate's been reorganized since the flood. Things are different now than they were in the past.
Oh, yeah. And I would ask the evolutionist is, how come you get the tracks in the lower layer, then you find the animal? The footprints that it made, and then that you find the animals in an upper layer. If that was millions of years, how'd that happen? I mean, there's a lot of things that just don't make sense, but, they're not in the textbooks and they're not really covered. And but that's why I'm glad you're here. So you can shine the light on these things. And man, I'm going to get people tuning into this place.
Well, think about this. Their whole argument about, well, why don't we find dinosaurs in this layer or find this creature with this creature? It's fallacious because, Brian, you mentioned in your talk the coelacanth. That's a living fossil. That was thought to be extinct, now living in the oceans today. But guess what? That, according to the evolutionary model, Brian, has a couple 100 million years worth of fossil representation, right? And it looks just like coelacanths with a little bit of variation. It looks just like the coelacanths that we see today. But yet, guess what we don't find buried together, Brian?
What's that?
Coelacanths and whales.
Yeah.
But we know they existed together because coelacanths are swimming around today. Whales are swimming around today. We also don't find humans and coelacanths buried together. But they live together. Just means they didn't get buried together, or they lived in different places. Coelacanths and whales are both in the water. So when they ask, well, why don't we find megalodons and whales buried together, or a mosasaur and a whale buried together? I would ask, why don't we find a coelacanth and a whale buried together?
Right.
It doesn't prove they didn't live at the same time. Would be,
or even a person and an alligator. How many or a tiger? But you bring up the coelacanth. My question to them is, how come scientists think they're different animals? They look the same. Why do you call them different genus, different species? That's smoke and mirrors there.
Very subjective taxonomy.
Oh yeah.
Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I mean, they're moving things around all the time.
And I think they're blinded by their evolutionary, bias. You can't have something millions of years ago remain unchanged to today. That's how Carl Werner falsified evolution.
Right. Yeah, and you don't see that in the textbooks of the museums, do you?
No, not yet. Well, we're working on it.
Exactly. That's what we're working to do. That's why we're working so many hours. If only we didn't have to sleep at night, Brian, we could get 7 to 8 hours more of research and study. Man. Brian, I appreciate your time. You got great endurance. We're coming up at the 3-hour mark. Your presentation itself was extremely comprehensive, and it was wide ranging, which is something that I really appreciate, Brian. So I do want to hand it to you in case you had any final words, final thoughts, or just anything that you wanted to leave us with in general.
Yeah, I would encourage people to have this in your head, but have it get to your feet so you do something with it. Don't just keep it under a basket. Let other people know about it. It would be like if you went to med school all your life and you never became a doctor. My wife said, "Oh, you'd be in a lot of debt." But we need to do something with this information. Wherever God leads you. But make sure you do what you can to influence other people with what you're learning. And that's when we get enough people yelling, saying the emperor has no clothes. And I can't wait for Brad Stein and Jim Brewer to start mocking this topic, because that's when game's over. Those things will go so viral.
Amen. Well, we're going to do our best to make your presentations, your videos and talks go viral. You've put a lot of work, time, and study into these. And so I do appreciate today's presentation, but also everything else you're doing on your channel, Brian. And so what I've done for those in the audience, if you like what you've seen and heard today, check the description box of this video. I've got a link to Brian's YouTube channel and also Brian's website. So make sure you go over to his YouTube channel, give it a subscription, check out his videos, give him some encouragement by hitting the like button, as it really does help with the algorithm. It helps get this information out there. I hope this has yet again shown everybody in our chat and anybody in the future who's going to watch this that it's 2025 and it really is an amazing time to be a biblical creationist.
Oh yeah. It sure is, man. I'm so thankful to be living right now.
Amen. It's a great time. We're having too much fun being creationists, Brian.
Oh yeah, there was a saying out there, may you live in interesting times. Del Bigtree says, yeah, we've overachieved.
Right. Yes, very true, Brian. So you keep doing what you're doing. And you guys in the chat keep doing what you're doing as well. Be critical thinkers, be objective as you analyze today's program. With that, Standing for Truth is out. God bless you all.